A very warm welcome to all participants of today's EIC EMA Info Day on regulatory support for the development of innovative medicines and technologies. My name is Tony Humphreys and I'm the head of Regulatory Science and Innovation Task Force at the European Medicines Agency. And it's a pleasure to be asked to moderate today's Information Day together with my co-moderator, Barbara Garatana from EIC. Today, our colleagues will try to provide you with an overview of the support that the European Medicine Agency provides to innovators, both in the pharmaceutical and medtech sectors. You will learn more about the EMA's opportunities for early regulatory dialogue, early points of contact, the priority medicines scheme, and one of our flagship offerings, scientific advice. You will also hear about experience in interacting with the EMA from academic researchers and companies funded by the various EIC programs, putting theory into practice. I would like very much in advance now to thank our colleagues both from the EIC and EMA for putting together what I hope you'll find to be a great program, and to all the speakers that contribute to this event, and hopefully your engagement in putting questions to those speakers. I wish you a successful Info Day, and I now give the floor to my co-moderator, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Tony, and it's a pleasure to have you here this morning. So good morning, everybody. My name is Barbara Garatana. I'm a Program Coordination Manager for the European Innovation Council and SME Executive Agency, EICMA, which is responsible for developing and implementing the European Innovation Council programs. It is a pleasure on behalf of EICMA to welcome you with Tony and our colleagues from the European Medicine Agency to this first EIC EMA Info Day. As you can see from the agenda that has been posted at the event website, and also you can see it also in the description box of this YouTube channel, we have a very packed morning. But before we get started, please allow me to go over a few housekeeping points. First, the meeting will be recorded, and the recording will be posted in this same YouTube channel, and the link will also be available at the event website. The audience will be muted, but you will be allowed to ask questions for the session with the Q&A by posting your question at Sli.do #EICEMA. We actually strongly encourage when a session has started, if a question pops into your head, to please write it immediately in the Sli.do at Sli.do at #EICEMA. It's very likely that we will not have enough time to answer all the questions that you will send us this morning. Unanswered question will be grouped and addressed in a FAQ document that will be posted at the event website, and it will be posted shortly after today. During this morning, the moderator or the speaker might like to know you better and will ask you to answer some multiple questions. So please, when prompted, go to Sli.do at #EICEMA under the poll tab and answer those questions. We will also have put together a survey that has a goal to understand better today's audience and also get your feedback for future possible offerings by the EIC EMA. Again, I will ask you to fill out this survey by going at Sli.do #EICEMA. The survey will be open until tonight. And with that, and it's a pleasure and a great honor to introduce you to Mr. Jean-David Malot, the Director of EICMA, who will kick off this first EIC EMA Info Day. Please, Monsieur Malot, the floor is yours.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to welcome the EIC health community and the extended EU research and innovation communities to this first EIC EMA Info Day on regulatory support for the development of innovative medicines and technologies. As you know, the EIC is the biggest EC innovation flagship with 10 billion euro of budget and its largest deep tech investors in Europe with more than 3 billion euro of budget. It was conceived to overcome the low success rate of the EU research and innovation ecosystem in first moving innovative technologies from lab to fab and scaling up, second, startups up to penetrate significantly the market. With its three funding schemes, Pathfinder, Transition and Accelerator, the EIC aims to overcome these shortcomings by supporting new technologies in Europe and deep tech startups and SME growth for the benefits of our European citizens and economy. The three EIC funding schemes specifically support bottom-up and top-down calls from early, high-risk and innovative technology development to their maturation and commercialization. To be noted also that the EIC supports its innovation communities not just with funding, but also with free business acceleration services such as business coaching and mentoring, access to cooperation and investors, in order to build partnership with key actors in the European innovation ecosystem. However, what we see is that delays and difficulties in navigating the regulatory framework might be hampering the advancements and commercialization of technologies, especially for health tech innovation and the highly innovative and high-risk health technologies and therapeutic solution of EIC-funded projects. We are excited in this context to have partnered with EMA to offer you this info day on EMA innovation support services. It aims to raise awareness of these services, to give you insights on when and how is best to apply to a given service, what you should expect from it and how to follow up. You will also hear testimonial from EIC researchers and companies on their experience with EMA and have the opportunity to ask questions to our EMA colleagues. You know, EMA is a real great partner. EMA supports developers across the product life cycle from very early to late stage innovative medicines and technologies, and it is never too early to contact EMA. Overlooking regulatory issues at any development stage, including very early one, can undermine the investments of the technology, the development of businesses around the technology, and the buy-in from investors. So I hope you will find this event informative and instructive, and that you will add regulation and compliance as one of the key factors in your technology and business development plan. By the end of today, you should know more about what EMA support services to consider and how to best approach EMA for support. We would like to thank warmly our EMA colleagues and allow me to have a particular thought for Emma Cook, the Executive Director, for his continuous support. We would like to thank them very much for a very fruitful cooperation to bring these events to the EIC innovation community and the broader European innovation communities. I'm sure this event is only the first step to a broader and richer cooperation. I thank the audience very much for your interest and participation, and I wish you a very, very successful event. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Director Mallow, for these extremely warm and welcoming remarks, and also for stressing the importance of a fruitful collaboration between the EIC and the EMA and the benefits of building in early contact with regulators into your development plans. I mean, that's absolutely the thrust of what follows. I would now like to give the floor to Emer Cook, who's my Executive Director, the European Medicines Agency Director, and she will share with us her perspectives on this collaboration. Please, Emer.
Good morning, and a very warm welcome to all of you today. Please let me start by thanking the European Innovation Council for organising this event, and in particular Jean-David Mallow, who has worked together with EMA to put it in place. I want to thank all EIC and EMA speakers, and of course all of you who have taken time out of your busy schedules to be here. I am truly delighted that many EIC beneficiaries from the academic sector and from SMEs are with us today. And of course, we also have beneficiaries of programs supported by the European Research Council, HEDEA, HERA and the IHI. So why are we all here? Well, academic researchers and SMEs are often at the source of breakthrough innovation in healthcare. And healthcare delivery is going through a paradigm shift. Until recently, healthcare technologies operated in distinct product sectors: diagnostics, medical devices, and medicines. The landscape is now moving to much more integrated approaches, and digitalization is the main driver. We see diagnostics, therapeutics, and connected devices working together to provide more patient-oriented solutions. At the European Medicines Agency, we understand the unique challenges that companies face during drug development, be it financing, be it intellectual property, be it talent management, be it digitalization. And we also know that many SMEs and universities have a knowledge gap when it comes to regulatory rules and regulations. And often they don't know how to best engage with us as regulatory authorities to discuss evidence generation, so that they can bridge the gap between science, research, and healthcare in order to facilitate the translation of health and medical innovation into real products that reach patients. This is why today's event is so important. It will help you understand how the European Medicines Agency engages with academic researchers and SMEs. You will hear what we can offer you in terms of support during the development life cycle. It will also help you understand the best fit-for-purpose platforms to open up conversations on trial design, on patient-centered endpoint selection, or even on standards for product approval. And this will, in turn, support the development of groundbreaking therapies and technologies. You will hear testimonials from EIC-funded SMEs and startups, and then real-life experience from interactions with EMA services. And of course, you will learn from these interactions. At EMA, we are convinced that we need to support front runners in their journeys. We need to support R&D projects to plug key knowledge gaps so as to improve the regulatory robustness of research projects. And we need to support the European Innovation Council in backing visionary entrepreneurs in Europe and beyond the horizon projects of tomorrow. We are looking forward to working with you and providing this support. So please do make sure that you take advantage of all the support we have to offer. Our website contains a wealth of information. Please consult it. Please use the different entry doors that EMA offers because they are designed to ease your interactions with us. So let me finish here with my thanks to you for your participation and your interest, and a special thanks to the EIC for collaborating with EMA to put together this event. This webinar will support your important work in providing breakthrough innovations of the future. And I wish you all a very fruitful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook, for these very kind remarks. And please allow me to join Mr. Malo in thanking you and your colleagues at the European Medicine Agency for your collaboration in putting together this Info Day for the European Research Innovation Community. As Mr. Malo has said, thanks to the EIC that innovative visions and research breakthroughs are turned into real medical devices and therapeutics that make a real difference in the life of each European citizen. Key to the success of the European Innovation Council programs is the proactive management carried out by the EIC program managers. It is a pleasure for me and for EISMEA to have today two of these program managers. Please allow me to give the floor first to Dr. Yordanis Arzimonoglu, the Program Manager in Health and Biotech, and then to Dr. Enrique Clavero-Tintoret, the Program Manager in Medical Technologies and Devices. Danos, the floor is yours.
Good morning to everybody. A warm welcome to all the presenters, primarily from EMA, and our beneficiaries. I would like to share with you my thoughts and a little bit of my vision, why I think this is an important event. It's not just another Info Day. And first, I I'm going to give you my thoughts on why I think it's important for EIC, and then, of course, why it's important for EMA. The EIC beneficiaries, the companies that we have, and the projects which are have also companies involved, they want to have the knowledge that's required to develop in health their products. And what we want to achieve with this event is to really strengthen the interaction between the EIC beneficiaries and the regulators. And why that? That is because we want to enable a more streamlined development of the new therapeutics and companion diagnostics that go with the therapeutics, and to make that easier for our beneficiaries. There is not enough knowledge to our beneficiaries, so catalyzing this interaction even further with events like this one, we do believe it is important. I would like to back up what I'm saying with a recent development that is a public knowledge and a press release that is not only a public institution like us doing that, but also private experience firms. For instance, there is a Dutch firm, it's on the news today, that invests about 2 billion, I mean equal size in terms of what they invest in healthcare with us. And they also make investments the same size that we do. So that was the reason that I picked up that as an example, that they have decided very recently to create an advisory board of involving high experience and big names of regulators in order to help their portfolio companies. We are doing the same things. We intend to do the same thing. And this event is the beginning of this process to bring EMA closer to EIC for the benefit of our portfolio companies and of our beneficiaries. The second thing that I want to share with you, my thoughts, is why is that a really important event for EMA? There are many reasons for that. The technology in the health area, in many thematic areas within the broader health area, is exploding. Is a revolutionary period in terms of all the news of all the new technologies. You have heard of gene editing and many others that are being developed as I speak to you. So even if EMA, for instance, has developed guidelines for genome editing, while interacting with companies that we have funded at the forefront, knowing the technology really well, we realize that, and having a look at the guide, that there is so much new knowledge that needs to be transferred somehow to EMA, because this is being developed as we speak. So that might include stem cells, that might include approaches that do not have any regulation so far. So it is vital for us, and I am very fortunate to be in the position when I interact with our beneficiaries to have access to this knowledge. We want to really transfer this knowledge to EMA in order to be considered for future necessary regulation. There is another example, this was from the genome editing era. There's another example that comes from FDA this time. FDA is restructuring the whole organization because they want to meet the requirements that cell and gene therapy, this exploding field, is imposing to them. So they realized that they didn't have the right people, they didn't have a structure that would be capable of really meeting the different requirements that came from the applicants that they wanted to, that they applied to them. With their new drugs or their new approaches for clinical trials, so they took the decision to restructure the entire FDA based on the developments in this explosive field called cell and gene therapy. Allow me to give you a third reason. The third reason comes also from another recent development that we have, although we have hundreds of trials, we don't have many drugs in cell and gene therapy, so there is a new drug that has been approved. And this new drug for beta thalassemia costs 3.5 million and is one single dose. So we'll understand that this is unacceptable, and this is because, of course, the clinical trials and the costs are still very high. If new regulation takes place, if the researchers and the innovators help with finding new ways that would help EMA and the regulatory authorities and FDA to be able to apply a new regulatory framework, that would have an impact also on the cost. And that is also why very important. Allow me to bring a third example to you, hoping to convince you why it's important for EMA and why it's important the feedback from us to EMA. That has to do with another area, it's called phage therapies, is an area that is known for a century, but has not been exploited at all because that was discovered in Georgia in the former Soviet era, and there is very little that you can access. Because of the problem of the antimicrobial resistance, it is known, widely accepted, that we need to go for new solutions. Among those new solutions is the phage therapy. There is no regulation about that. And it is very understandable why there is no regulation. So in this field, the approach is totally different than the antibiotics. You have to go specifically, it's targeted. These are approaches that we need new technologies that are currently being developed. We don't think of one like the same way with an antibiotic. We think of a specific phage that's going to target a specific microbe, so it all changes. It's a different approach that requires new regulation. So the technologies that we've seen and we are seeing in our projects in the phage-based therapies is important to also transfer this new knowledge to EMA. So with these three examples, I wanted to send a strong message that there is a lot of interest from the EMA side and there is a lot of interest from the EIC side. And I would like to close this brief intervention by saying that I'm very confident that this is not just another Info Day, but a valuable event that will generate and trigger more strategic actions from either side for the benefit, of course, of our beneficiaries, but also of the European health area in its entirety.
I would like to start by thanking you, colleagues from the European Medicines Agency, and all the participants in the event today. My comments will mostly relate to the medical technologies and devices portfolio at the EIC. It's a very important part of the agency, EIC. MedTech regulatory paths in the past have been quite separate from the track followed by biotechs and pharmaceutical industry. MedTech usually requires CE marking rather than EMA approval. Increasingly, the line between therapeutic molecules and biologicals and devices is being blurred. Consider, for example, electroceuticals. Electronics enable implantable devices delivering functionalities similar to those expected from traditional molecule-based therapies, or in vitro diagnostic devices and new imaging modalities used in conjunction with new molecular entities for patient stratification or quantification of response to inform clinical decision-making. The future will bring a growing number of highly effective therapeutic approaches, combining technologies at the interface of EMAs and CE marking domains. We currently have over 200 companies developing medical technologies and medical devices at the EIC, within the EIC medical portfolio, MedTech portfolio. In these companies, Europe has committed substantial resources. Several projects have received in aggregate over multiple investment rounds and multiple non-dilutive funding awards over 30 million euros to support some high-impact technologies. They are fighting brain disease by means of implantable and non-implantable devices. They are fighting heart disease with safer valve implants. They're developing software for heart surgery planning. Body imaging with high-resolution MRI is going beyond the purely anatomical imaging to gather cell physiology data, which is a revolution in the field. Overall, about 30% of our investment and grants are deployed in health technologies. Europe and the EIC, as its flagship tech investment vehicle, is delivering on its commitment to support medtech solutions. And the regulation establishing the legal framework and procedures to bring these solutions to patients should be an enabling tool in the quest. The regulatory framework must protect patients by ensuring that only technologies with sufficient efficacy and safety reach the market. But at the same time, and this is a major challenge, regulation must facilitate innovation to save lives, taking inventions to the patient swiftly. Now, currently, in the field of medical technologies, CE marking is the main path to reach the market, mostly independent from EMA. Recently, the migration from Medical Devices Directive to the Medical Devices Regulation, as well as from the In Vitro Diagnostics Directive to the In Vitro Diagnostics Regulation, has demonstrated how difficult it is to enact major regulatory changes while supporting fast innovation to market deployment, and at the same time, increase safety. Here we have work to do, and much can be learned from our colleagues at EMA. EMA has demonstrated very recently, throughout the COVID-19 crisis, how swiftly evaluation of clinical data for safety and efficacy and close cooperation with European innovators can be a winning strategy. EMA services, SME office, horizon scanning, and other support actions at EMA can be of great interest for many of our projects. Likewise, our engines of medical technology invention, the Pathfinder and transition programs at the EIC, will help EMA identify the next wave of technologies, crossing the boundaries between CE marking process and EMA approval paths, and requiring adaptation of services and regulatory frameworks. We look forward to today's event and to the continued cooperation between the EIC and EMA. And again, I would like to thank you all the participants, for joining us in this joint effort to develop and use regulatory frameworks as efficient tools to serve patients, clinicians, scientists, inventors, and society at large. I wish you all a fruitful and very enjoyable event today.
Many thanks.
Okay, please, apparently we have some audio problem. Please, Tony, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, yeah, sorry there, yeah. Okay, no, many thanks, Jordanis and Enrique, for these opening remarks and for highlighting the sort of very dynamic and explosive sort of innovation agenda, both in the medical and health tech type sectors. And they could indeed be a very fruitful subject of future workshops. But turning our attention now to the purpose of today, and as Barbara previewed in her opening remarks, we'd like to invite you to get engaged with the Sli.do poll. And I would like just to see what the audience, the composition of the audience. I mean, you've already been thanked for making yourselves available today, but we'd like to just get a feel for what the distribution in the audience is. So if I can invite you to log on, use the QR code or the EIC EMA hashtag, and please indicate what your affiliation is, academia, SME, spin-off, or otherwise. And I'll pause just a few moments to let that fill out. Yeah, thank you very much for that. And it's nice to see a very good balance between the various sort of interests there. And as a follow-up, and this is always a dangerous question, is have you ever used EMA support services? Some of the opening speakers have actually referred to them, but hopefully you've heard of the European Medicines Agency, but more concretely, have you ever used any of our support services, be it the SME office, orphan designation, pediatric investigation, scientific advice, etc., innovation task force? And again, I'll pause a few moments to let you answer that one. Okay, colleagues, we're certainly looking at a sort of 3-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio there. So there certainly shows the benefit, hopefully, of this offering that we're about to kick off into today. And maybe at the end, not quite at the end of today, that will be too rapid. But if we had a repeat workshop in a few years' time, or even sooner, hopefully that distribution could vary as a result of this workshop and other issues to come. So with that being said, then I will now enter into our program in terms of the substantive elements. And if I can now hand over to my colleague, who will be the first sort of presenter from EMA. And I want to introduce her. Her name is Leonor Enish, and she is a Senior Scientific Officer in the Small and Medium-Sized Enterprise Offices, the SME office at the agency. And she'll give us an overview of the various development support initiatives we have for innovative medicines and technologies. And I'm asking you also, don't, now that you've sort of found the Sli.do application and it's been very well used with those opening questions, don't hesitate to start to raise your questions in Sli.do even during her presentation as your imagination is triggered, and then we'll get to that then hopefully in the Q&A at the end of Leonor's presentation. So please, Leonor, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning for everybody. So it's a pleasure to be here today. I cannot see yet my slides. Are you? Okay, yes, I can see them. So today I have the challenge to give you an introduction of, in a nutshell, of what are the services that we provide that will support you, that can have the potential to support you on your development. Next slide, please. And next slide. So I will give you a short introduction about EMA, how we work, and what are the services we have to support your innovation. I will go a bit more into detail on the engagement with SMEs and with academia, and then I'll try to give you a brief idea of certain aspects, certain legislations that are quite important, namely the legislation for orphan designation, so for rare diseases, legislation on pediatric medicines, ATMP, so advanced medicine therapies, and then to finalize, I'll give you just a briefly overview of what's happening within the clinical trials regulation. So let's start. Next slide, please. So what do we do as the EPA? There are four important pillars, which the first one is to facilitate development access to medicines. And it's one of the aims of these Info Day is to let you know what we do in terms of promoting innovation. Another very important aspect is the evaluation of the applications, and also to keep them up to date, and monitoring the safety of medicines is also extremely important. Also, I would like to highlight that EMA provides a reliable source of information on human and veterinary medicine. So for all the products that are approved by EMA, you can see on our website what are the bases, what is the evidence that was used to give that particular authorization. So it's something that I would like to highlight to you. Have a look at the information that we provide on medicines. So next slide. How do we do that work? So the EMA does that work with the help or with the support of the different member states, the national competence authority of the different member states. We work together with them, and we work together with the European Commission. Next slide, please. So this is a very busy slide, which try in a way to compile the different possibilities for interaction and opportunities for you to have support in the different fields. So as I mentioned, I will give you a good overview of what we do in the SME office. So I work for the SME office, give you some flavor of the academia entry point. And we'll try then to see the different aspects of the legislation in terms of orphans, pediatrics, and ATMPs. My colleagues then in the following session will give you a better overview of certain mechanisms, tools that we found that were so important that deserve to have a session per itself to give you an idea how do they work and in which situations you can use them. So, and these are the Innovation Task Force, our Priority Medicines designation, and also the scientific advice. Next slide, please. So, I would like to highlight to you that EMEA provides very consolidated list of available guidance and opportunities for interacting with us. So you have, for each of the procedures, you have some easy to access or guidance like this one. I took the example of the scientific advice. So once more, look at our website. It's very important that you have an idea of what are the different services and you can explore. Of course, you can also contact us, but it's important that you know that they are there and that you can access to them. Next slide. So next slide, please. What I'm going now to talk is about the support that we give to SMEs. So what the SME support is foreseen by the legislation. So this is a regulation from 2005. So the SME office was established there, and indeed it was. It's quite a very mature office. What do we do there? We try to give. So one of the important of our tasks, it's to give you the SME status. So all the companies that want to benefit from the SME incentives need to be qualified with us. And that qualification is based on the SME definition. It's a commission recommendation that takes into account the headcount, the annual turnover, or the annual balance from the company. And we also need, when we do that qualification, we need to understand the full structure of the company, not only that single company that requests to be qualified, but whether there are the complete organization of the company. So if there are other linked or partner companies that really need to be considered within this qualification. So for these, we provide a lot of guidance, and you can also contact us if you have doubts, whether on how to fill the request, or whether if you feel that you are or not within within if you follow the criteria to be qualified as an SME. So what are the incentives that we provide? I've mentioned that we have the SME office, and the SME office is a contact point, and you can contact us for all sorts of questions. And what do? We provide you regulatory assistance. We go further into detail. We can organize SME briefing meetings where, in a way, we can guide you in your development and help you to understand how we work and what are the different tools for your specific development that you can use. We provide significant fee incentives, and this is really one of the most important aspects for SMEs. We also give free translation of the product information at the time of the marketing authorization. And we give training and awareness sessions and info days, like today's info day. We also have an SME newsletter compiling the information on relevant aspects that could be useful, and we send you mailings wherever we find that they are appropriate. We also have some partnering and network activities. So next slide, please. And I've provided here some statistics, and these statistics I've taken them from the SME annual report. So at the end of the year, we produce an annual report. We are working on the 2022 annual report, where we give we try to profile the SMEs and their activities. So as you can see, we have the companies that are registered with us are spread all over Europe, and also they are, in terms of the size, more or less one third of third. So micro, small, and medium enterprises. So next slide, please. The next slide, I've also give you some statistics from the annual report, and we can see that most of the companies that are registered with us are SMEs. Also, we can see that 13% of them are incorporated in the last 3 years. So there's some kind of activity and new companies being created. Next slide. So what I would like to go a bit more into details so that you can understand what is this regulatory assistance that we provide at the level of the SME office. So we have a dedicated email that you can see, and we have a dedicated telephone number that you can call us, and we can try to address all sorts of questions you may have. So we are a very small team, so it would be completely impossible for us, or it's impossible to be experts in all the different areas that the EMEA covers. But what we do is that within the agency, we have contact points in all the different relevant offices, and we can address all sorts of questions. And you can and the questions, and I listed the most common topics. So in terms of what is the SME definition and what are the incentive covers, that are very general questions. But then we can address questions on scientific advice, on prime designation, pediatric requirements, clinical trials, etc., etc. So we try to address as much as possible all the questions that fall within the scope of the EMEA role. Next slide, please. Also, I would like to talk a bit about our SME briefing meetings. These meetings are very informal and flexible. So the aim is to provide a platform for early dialogue with SMEs, where the SMEs can have a space to discuss with us what is their regulatory strategy, and also for us to give them a bit of guidance in terms of what are the procedures that for that particular development, or the interactions tools that we feel that they should follow. Also, we can, in a way, introduce them to them, or to help them to prepare for certain procedures. How do we do that? So a company that would like to discuss with us their development can contact us. Then we go with her through we try to understand what is the development that they are going through, what is the background of the product, what are their questions. We try in a way to help them to prepare a presentation where we try to identify the main questions that we find that is relevant to them and that we can address. And then we join a team of colleagues from the different offices, can be scientific advice, can be from Prime, can be from regulatory affairs, and we go through with them on their development plans, and we can help them, and we can in a way try to have a follow-up and direct them to certain offices for further support. So this is free of charge, and indeed it's one of the important incentives that we can provide in terms of development. Next slide, please. So I've already mentioned that the fee incentives are one of the most important incentives because when you interact with the EMEA for certain services, there are fees that are associated to that. But for example, for scientific advice, which my colleague later on will go through and explain you the process, there are very significant incentive fees. And even for cases of SMEs and orphan designation, there are sometimes even not completely fee reduction. So I've in this slide you have all sorts of fees that are available. Also links for the document, our website, where we have all the explanation. But it's something also that we can help you to see what are the different fees that you are entitled and that you can use on your development. Next slide, please. So in terms of training, it's just to highlight that we have we provide training, info days, the SMEs news, this periodic SMEs newsletters where we compile all the legislation. We highlight certain events that we are organizing, and we also sometimes send you target mails. For example, if there is a new guideline on a certain aspect under consultation that it's relevant for you to participate. So we do that for certain situations. Next slide. I've also in this slide, again from our annual report, I try to capture some information and how SMEs are using the different interaction tools. And we can see that indeed SMEs are a significant participant, have a significant participation in terms of using our services, in terms of supporting innovation and development. Next slide, please. So now going into academia, our engagement with academia it has a framework. There's a framework for collaboration. So it's not like for the SME support that it's within the legislation. This is a framework for engagement. And what do we aim to do with that? So we try to promote and further develop the regulatory support for translation into novel methodologies, science into novel methodologies and medicines. And we try to ensure the best scientific expertise and researchable is also available. And we collaborate on areas of research and regulatory sciences. Also for academia, we have a dedicated entry point that you can see, also available on our website. And what I would also like to highlight to you today is that, and since indeed we have so many attendees from academia, that we have started an EMEA pilot that enhance support to academic non-profit developers of advanced therapy medicinal products. So please go to our website and see what do we have in terms of support on this pilot. Also, next slide, please. Also, what I would like to highlight to you is that EMEA has published a regulatory science research needs document, where in a way we try to identify topics for research. So I would invite you to go and look at that document and see what are the areas that we identified. So we have identified more 110 topics, and in a way we also invite funders to support those identified topics. So and this initiative in a way is try to stimulate researchers to consider and address those needs. Next slide, please. So now we are going, and I try in a way to have a summary of the important aspects for the different topics that I was asked to highlight. And one important one is the orphan designation. And what do we have in terms of the orphan designation? So the legislation in a way foresees criteria for orphan designation, and the two most important criteria is the prevalence of the condition and also the seriousness of the condition. So it has to be a rare condition, and it has to be life-threatening and or chronically debilitating condition. So in that case, if you are granted an orphan designation, and this is assessed by our COMP, so it's a scientific committee from EMEA that does evaluation, and then this is followed by the European Commission decision on that. So what is important for you is that this orphan designation, they are all published in our website. So you can there's a community register where you can have a look of all these orphan designations. And also what I would like to highlight is that having an orphan designation gives you very important financial incentives that can be then complemented of being with an SME. Next slide, please. So the next topic is the pediatric medicines, and the legislation on pediatric medicines foresees some obligations but gives also some rewards, because it was felt that it was necessary to promote the development of drugs for children. And what companies need to take into account is that they need to develop a pediatric investigation plan where they have where they need to have their development plan and ensure that necessary data is obtained in the conditions in which the medicinal product may be used to treat children. And very important to highlight is that you need very early to take to think about the pediatric development. Also, what I would like to highlight to you is that there are rewards associated to that, and also that all the studies done in children are studies that will be published in our website. So next slide, please. So in terms of advanced therapies, what are these advanced therapies? There is a definition. So, and sometimes it's difficult for a company to really see whether it's advanced therapy or not, and sometimes it's useful for their development to have the ATMP classification. So this is a service that EMEA provides. And it's important for you to use it if indeed you are developing an ATMP. What I would also like to highlight is that there is a procedure called ATMP certificate just for SMEs, where you can certify your development in terms of quality and non-quality, and we'll go through it. And that can be, if we can stamp it in terms of asking funding for the investors, it's a mechanism that gives some level of insurance. So next slide, please. And now I'm going to this is my last topic. I will very briefly tell you a bit about what is this clinical trial regulation. So what happened is that we had initially clinical trials done individually by member states being approved, and there was no harmonization. There was a start of harmonization with the Clinical Trials Directive, and then with the new clinical trial regulation, there is full harmonization. So this legislation applied since the 31st of January 2022, so since last year. And this year actually, and today, we have a milestone. Next slide, please. So what is the role of the EMEA? The role of the EMEA has been in terms of providing the tool, so the Clinical Trials Information System, CTIS, which is the business tool of the clinical trial regulation, and this is managed by the EMA. So, and this tool harmonizes submission, assessment, and supervision of the clinical trials in the EU. So, and from today, all clinical trials need to be submitted via all new clinical trials via this CTIS portal. So I've also included the access to the database where you can have access to secure and also public information on clinical trials. So next slide. I've finalized here my presentation. What I would like then to as a take-home message is to let you know that indeed EMA provides extensive guidance. Please have a look of what we have on our website. We offer several opportunities for interacting with us and for giving support, so please use them. And also if you are for academia and SMEs, you have dedicated contact points and specific incentives. So please use them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, many thanks for that, Leonor, now. And I think now we're going to go into take some questions from Sli.do. There's been a number of questions that have come in. So I'll leave you just to give fairly quick fire answers to them, Leonor. So over to you, please. Yeah. And the very first one, if I can read out, for fee incentives, what are the typical fees for the services with and without the reduction for the SME? And I would suggest we give a reference rather than the scale of fees, Leonor.
Well, the scale of fees is actually quite high, and but as I said, for the scientific advice, which is really the best mechanism that we give in terms of providing advice on the development, and this advice can cover quality, non-clinical, whatever. These are we have full for SMEs that there is full waivers on that service. So the scientific advice is one of the most important one, and also in terms of the marketing authorization, when you apply for a marketing authorization, indeed if you are an SME and if you are an orphan, if you have an orphan designation, you don't pay any fee. So these are, I think, really significant ones. And also maybe highlighting the translations, because very few SMEs in a way, but already some reach the point of the marketing authorization, and all the translations is a really burden for them, and the translations in the different EU language is also something extremely expensive, and it's the EMA that covers all the costs of those translations. So if you want to have really figures, they are all available in our website, but they are really significant.
Yeah, we can link them in. Go on to the next one then, Leonor, if I can invite you. What's the process to request an SME briefing meeting? Any guidance available?
Call us. Just call our helpline and we'll go through it. It's important that you have a background of your product, and then we will start a dialogue. We'll ask you the questions, and usually what we ask companies is to prepare a PowerPoint presentation that will help us to guide through the meeting. But we'll go with you through the questions in order to make the meeting with all the different colleagues from the different offices as beneficial and as efficient as possible.
And the next question on SMEs, can an SME sort of academia based in the UK, and I've seen the same question from the US, also access the SME incentive? So that's outside of the EU. What's the story there, briefly?
Yes, well, the idea is to promote innovation and to have innovative drugs approved in EU. So what companies can do is that need to be themselves, so a company in UK or FDA or whatever, they outside the EU, they need by themselves to fulfill the criteria of SMEs. So they need to be qualified by us, but they need to be attached to a company that is based in the EU. So they will not have a number as such, but they will be attached via a EU consultancy. That can happen on a first step, so that you can, in a way, reach the system. And then once the interactions grow, what we recommend is that that particular company establish in the EU their own company that in a way is the contact point with us. But that can start with the company having a regulatory consultant, and then on the next step,
yes,
building.
And moving on with the registration, you have to be registered before you can apply to services. I'm not clear to me whether the question is about registering with the SME office, or which I think the answer is yes, or any other registration, maybe company registration at the national level. I don't know. Can you comment on that one, Leonor?
Well, we are quite flexible, and it's not that we'll not answer a question if you're not registered with us. So we definitely, the first step is to support you with your registration. So with the qualification and SME, that qualification is extremely important when you want to benefit from the incentives, namely the fee incentives, or when we go to scientific advice. Is very, very important that in advance your SME qualification is active. So that's something that that we stress, and that we are in contact with colleagues from scientific advice, so that you don't need to pay the fees. And also maybe in terms of the qualification, if you have some urgent topic that you want some urgent procedure you want to take, let us know if your qualification is urgent, and we will give priority to it.
Yeah. If we can move on to the next one, is ATMP certification also open for academic developers? Quick fire answer.
This is only open for SME. For SMEs is a specific incentive for SMEs.
And how could an academic developer then get SME status?
Well, an academic development, what we have is that you need to fulfill the criteria of the SME legislation. And if indeed there are some activities that you have that it can be considered as an enterprise, then we could consider it and see if indeed it falls within that category. But for that, these qualifications can be, there will be a dialogue with us. We'll try to see if there is some criteria that you can use, so some activities that you can use that can, in a way, fulfill within the criteria, and that can take some time. Sometimes we can do it, and sometimes academia can fulfill, but many times they don't. What we try to do is that to see what type of support you need, and together also with colleagues from academia, try to see what we can do within the framework that we have.
Okay, and can we move on then to just detail on the SME briefing meetings themselves? They're one-to-one personal meetings between the developer and the agency?
Yes, indeed. It's just from applicants, the developers, and colleagues from different offices from the agency. So it doesn't have the involvement of the scientific committees, and is in a way a starting point so that the company can reach more formal forms of interaction.
And then on to the next one. We're running out of time now on the Q&A. How long does the SME qualification take?
Well, that's a good question.
On average?
It can take 1 month, but for complex situations, complex ownership procedures, it can take longer. If there are some doubts, if we have some questions that we need to raise, and of course, it also depends on the time that the company needs to address this question. So it can take longer.
Okay.
It can take one day.
And then the next question just up on the top is similar support available for large companies?
Well, large companies have they can also access to scientific advice. They can also access to prime, but they don't have the incentives that are offered to the SMEs. So, and of course, the relevance for a big pharma of the SME briefing meeting is much more reduced because they have their structure. It's not like the SMEs that have very few resources.
Yeah. And then maybe our last question, I think, because we really are running out of time now with the Q&A, next to the dedicated services SME or indeed the academic liaison function, is there a dedicated service to non-profit organizations? And I suppose if not, then how can they engage with EMA? So it's a variant on the big pharma, maybe.
Well, I think you can, as I said, we are flexible. You can always contact us, and then we can see what's the best, who can best help you to address your question.
Okay. Dear colleagues, I think that's the fact that our Sli.do has disappeared is a little indicator that we're out of time on this session. But thank you very much both to you, Leonor, for for giving the sort of the landscape. And colleagues, we'll be coming back on one or more of these elements in more detail during the morning with subsequent speakers. The commitment that I think we can give, both ourselves and myself and Barbara, is to ensure that we will get questions to all of the Q&A, so they're not forgotten about just because they didn't appear on the screen. You can see the breaking questions, so we'll endeavour to give you responses to that. And many thanks for your very active engagement. So if I can thank you very much now, Leonor, and if we move on to our next presenter, and Leonor has set the scene, and it's a pleasure for me now to introduce you to Dr. Falk Eamon, who's a Senior Scientific Officer in the Regulatory Science and Innovation Task Force. And he actually chairs this Innovation Task Force meeting offerings that we have at the agency. And he will explain to you how do you apply for it and give some practical examples based on his very large experience in this area. So please, Falk, over to you.
And inviting me. I would like to start my presentation with a poll. If you can put the next poll on screen, please, which reads at, are you aware of EMA development support services? And this is basically aware before today, of course. I was positively surprised that around a quarter of you already use the services, which is very nice. And I can see here that around half or more than half, well, about half of you are aware of these services. This is very good. Hopefully after today, 100% will be aware of these services and in fact using them. Can I have my next slide, please, then? Next slide. Thank you. I have 12 slides and 2 more polls, so I think we are good in time. In Europe, we have several strategies for innovation. For example, the Commission strategy, the pharmaceutical strategy for Europe here top left, and innovative health initiatives. And on the right, we see 2 strategies here from the regulator. However, the challenge is really to translate these strategies or the recommendation in these strategies into tangible outcomes. And 5 goals are formulated in the regulatory strategies we have here from the European Medicines Agencies network in Europe. And 2 of them are highlighted here in red: catalyzing the integration of science and technology in medicines development, as well as enabling and leveraging research innovation in regulatory science. So how do we do that? And one part of this is indeed the service I go more into detail right now. Next slide, please. The Innovation Task Force is a multidisciplinary platform for preparatory dialogue and orientation. And now this is important. It's not only on medicines or substances, but also on methods and technologies related or important for the development of medicines. It supports innovative drug development, so the emphasis here on innovative. It is early and is informal, with opinion leaders. It can be requested at any stage of these developments and is free of charge, which is very important. We have the meetings almost online, all of them, about 1.5 hours in a brainstorming style on the areas where there's no guidance available. And another step which is very important is that we put the entry hurdle very, very low. There's a 3-page template to be completed. This is available online, and this is the first point of contact to engage into the service. Next slide, please. So a bit of what topics do we discuss? In terms of scientific or technical topics, we talk about preclinical development, manufacturing, quality aspects, clinical as well. But as well, regulatory, what do we do if there's no guidance available? How do you proceed? Who do you talk to next? And I think what is very relevant, we see more and more legal topics. So what is my product? Product classification itself is within the member states. However, it is extremely relevant for the further development that a young developer or startup knows what the product you want to bring on our single market is. Why is it important? Because depending on its classification, the evidence generation requirements might differ. And therefore, in the end as well, some important information whether this product has a place on the market or not. Now, what we do not, and this is very important, is we don't discuss business models or business cases. However, of course, the information you gain from these interactions will facilitate decision making. Next slide, please. So give you a bit of a flair what kind of developments are discussed in these kind of meetings. Emerging therapies, so ATMPs, gene therapy, cell and targeted therapies, as well as nanotechnology used in medicines. In terms of methods, we saw 3 R's, so replacement, reduction, and refinement of animal used in the non-clinical development, new delivery routes and systems, as well as emerging technologies. We've been very strong last year on digital technologies, clinical trial methodology, omics. Novel manufacturing, I think, is a very important part, platform technology, and associated medical devices with the development of pharmaceuticals. Next slide, please. Now, what we do as well at the European Medicines Agency, we started tracking enabling technologies for certain procedures that we engage in. And here on the right, you see a graph where these enabling technologies we saw in 2022 are located in terms of request. And we try to make it more relevant to you in highlighting the ones in orange, which are overlapping with the EIC Pathfinder Health Legacy technology focus. And you can see very nicely the first 3 GMOs, novel biomarker omics, and nanotechnologies are both hits, as well as genome editing, devices, and biomaterials. This helps us as well to identify trends and organize resources accordingly. Next slide, please. Now, a bit of flavor. Who do we see? Academia and consortia and SME form the main bulk of participants. However, we are open to any kind of applicants. So large pharma or any kind of applicant all over the world can apply for these meetings. Next slide, please. Now, a bit of the process. How does it really work? Again, as said before, there's a request form which is online, which is a 3 or 4 pager, and it should be not difficult and shouldn't take you more than 2 hours, I think, to complete this request form, which is then submitted to us, and we internally within our team, we look at it and evaluate it and potentially have interaction with you. And if the first step, the first hurdle is done, then we ask for a bit more information in terms of a briefing document, which requests a bit more background on the topic or the technology, on the rationale for seeking scientific advice, proposed topics for discussion, which is very important, and as well your position on the topic. It is not that we do the job for you. It is more that you come with a proposal and we discuss whether this proposal is feasible for your further development. And based on the second document, the briefing document, we take a decision to either plan an ITF briefing meeting or refer to other support mechanisms. Next slide, please. So who's joining these meetings? Of course, in-house staff and experts with respective competences, because these meetings are quite heterogeneous. They can go really from manufacturing to certain technologies, AI, devices, etc. So we need to handpick for each meeting the right experts. We use as well the network, so members from our committees and working parties, which are experts from national competent authorities, and there are more than around 50 competent authorities in Europe, in which experts pool we can dip in, made out of our 27 member states. And of course, sometimes we still need further expertise, and indeed, the ITF is a platform where we can ask anybody, any expert, to join our discussions, as long as the conflict of interest is being checked and everybody's bound to a lifelong duty of confidentiality. There are as well possibilities for other regulators to join, and recently we had FDA, Swissmedic, and colleagues from Singapore. Next slide, please. So before coming to the examples now, may I ask to please put on the second poll? Thank you very much. And this is a bit the question to find out at what stage or technology readiness level is the development you're currently working on or you're involved in. And we have 4 different answers here. I think we cannot see the last one here. The first one is proof of concept development and validation stage in the lab. So translated for us as pharmaceutical developer as preclinical trials, exploratory safety toxicity. Another one is technology validated and demonstrated, first in human, phase 1. And the first one is basic technology research, TLR 1 to 2 and 7 to 9. Okay, I can see around half of you are in technology level 3 to 4, which is fantastic, because this is indeed, I think, the most common entry level for such interactions. Can we move on, please, to the next slide? So now I have 3 examples here, very simple and blinded, of course. So this applicant was from academia at a proof of concept stage, and they developed gene therapy for neurological disorders. And the reason for contacting us was bringing the innovation towards the patient, and they wanted to know what are the evidence requirements for this innovative product to do the next steps. We discussed the delivery methods and as well the preclinical strategy for induced pluripotent stem cells. Now, the link to the pathfinders here, we looked at you have support to cell tissue engineering and reprogramming technology, as well as to nanotechnology. Next slide, please. So this is the second example, and this is a small medium-sized enterprise being at the preclinical stage. And they develop an in vivo bioprinting of autologous living cells. Here they had questions on the product classification. And again, what are the evidence requirements for market entry for this technology? And here we provided feedback on the cells, which are ex vivo expanded, that they're likely an advanced medicinal product, and on the bioprinter, which is an independent delivery device. This is as well linked to the Pathfinder health topics of materials for health, cells and tissue engineering, lab, and organ on a chip. Next slide, please. So the last example and the last slide of the presentation is an applicant. It was academia for proof of concept. It was a novel treatment strategy for ocular opacities. And the reason for contacting us, they wanted to better understand the principal mode of action. And again, what are the evidence requirements for market entry? And what are the next steps? How can they put this innovation forward? They wanted information on the development of nanoparticles and dyes, and whether these dyes should be encapsulated or not, and about the mode of action of the product. Based on the interaction, we recommended that this product is a medical device and that the applicant shall contact national competent authorities for certification. And again, here the link to the Pathfinder is nanotechnology and imaging. So now, may I ask you to put on the last poll for this session? Thank you, and please don't disappoint me. Very good. What are you considering now after this presentation applying for support services? And of course, there are more presentations, I think, on different services we provide. And I'm very happy to see that now 70% of you consider further engagement or consider that these interactions might be of value. And with this, thank you very much, Tony. I think I finished my presentation and open for questions.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Falk. Short and sweet, if ever there was one. So if we can have a look at the Sli.do poll in terms of the questions coming in, sorry, the Q&A. Okay. So, I mean, Falk, I mean, the first one is can ITF discuss medical devices? So.
Yeah, that's a very delicate question. So pure medical devices, I would say rather not, because they're not within the current mandate of the European Medicines Agency, although the new mandate is opening in this direction. But if these medical devices are associated with a pharmaceutical or maybe even co-developed, then I think this is an interesting development, relevant what we're trying to support. So depending on whether it's linked or associated with a pharmaceutical development.
Yeah, so it's essentially supporting combination product development, convergent technology development, yeah, but not device in isolation, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, the next one on the next top one is, what's the difference between the advice of the ITF and the advice of national regulators?
So national regulators have as well, maybe a bit heterogeneous across Europe as well, but have different advices. They have national advices, they have national innovation offices. And indeed, we work very, very close together. And sometimes we refer from our central innovation office back to a national one, because maybe it is a request on a device, which only a national regulator can do. So we work very close together. There is a certain overlap. And sometimes if you want to have a European voice, so more than one member state feedback, I think the centralized is advisable. Whereas sometimes where the scope is not really within the ITF on a central level, the national ones is better situated to answer that.
Okay. The next one then is, are ITF meetings disclosed?
No, they are confidential. There will be minutes after this meeting, which will be checked by the participants to ensure there's no misunderstanding, and they will be shared with the applicant. And there's no further disclosure. Sometimes the applicant chooses to use these minutes for further advertisement or funding rounds, etc. They're free to do so, but we don't disclose any information.
Yeah, good. And I mean, I think you alluded to that in your presentation with regards to those sort of generic case studies without giving the specifics of the applicant, indeed. But that's quite an important, it allows then to have very free and open discussions. The next question I think you've faced many times is, when should we go to EMA scientific advice versus an ITF meeting?
So the good message is we are working very, very close with the EMA scientific advice, and we refer quite often from ITF requests to scientific advice and vice versa as well. So it really depends on the questions you have, on the nature of the questions you have, and as well as your development state. So if you have already generated a certain amount of data, which you want experts to look at, I think scientific advice is rather the right forum. But rest assured, whichever service you apply first, we speak on a daily basis and refer from one service to the other.
Yeah. Okay. And when should the applicant submit the briefing document? How many weeks after submitting the initial request?
So we have meetings within the team on a weekly basis, and once you submit the request, we look at it and we get back to you within, let's say, 10 days. And then let's say the clock is ticking on your side. It is absolutely open. There's no strict timeline. It's a very informal interaction. But of course, it would be good within 1 or 2 months that you come back, because otherwise we lose track and might close the case. But there's no strict timeline.
No, and Falk, I think that's very important to emphasize. This is a very low entry threshold by design. It's a very informal sort of interaction, and it's a precursor then to the more formal scientific advice that indeed Jordanis will be talking or discussing with us later on this morning. And a little bit linked, what kind of information of our innovative product must we have before contacting the ITF?
So the second poll was a bit aiming at that. So it's TRL 3 to 4, or some initial information on proof of concept, I think, would be necessary. What you see in the request form is basically describe in a very short paragraph what your product is about, describe the mechanism of action, if known, and describe as well what kind of questions you have. It's very important that you very clearly state what do you need, how can we help you, because this directs as well who can help you and who we need to invite in order to help you. But have a look at the request form. There are 4 or 5 questions. Have you contacted anybody before? Please share with us any documentation maybe you had with other regulators. And based on this one, we engage with you. The request form is 3 pages and a couple of questions which are easy to answer.
Yeah. And then again, in terms of eligibility, can UK-based academic teams get assistance from the ITF, or do they need a European collaborator, a bit like the SME discussion with Leonor earlier?
Yes, you do not need a European collaborator. And indeed, we see quite a number from UK as well as from US, Japan, all over the world. So you don't need any affiliation. Just fill out the form in English, please.
Yeah, and indeed, Falk, just to emphasize that, I mean, we're open. I mean, development is global, and this sort of entry threshold is very much open at the global level. When you're dealing with something like SME designation, that then is governed by an EU regulation, and then indeed we're bounded by that regulation. Whereas ITF is really an invented service for this early contact developers. So it's a very open concept. And again, along those lines, is advice from ITF binding or not?
It is clearly not binding, and it is an informal feedback from the experts who are present there. So it's not an official feedback from the European Medicines Agency, its working parties committees, or any other institutions the expert might be affiliated with. Nevertheless, it should give you a flavor. It should stimulate you maybe to ask the right questions to a follow-on scientific advice, or to the right institution you might go to next, but it's not binding.
Yeah, and indeed, colleagues, even the more formal scientific advice that Jordanis will be describing later on today is also not binding on the developer. And there's a very good reason for that. You, the innovator, are master of your own innovation. And whereas regulators can help you sort of navigate the sort of in the passage to to the market, or certainly to the patient, to the healthcare application, we're not substituting for your own sort of expertise and your own creation with regards to the innovation per se. So indeed, often we need to be educated about these breaking innovations quite simply because we haven't been confronted with them before. So one of the advantages of platforms like the ITF is this two-way street of knowledge exchange between developers and indeed the regulators. So there's a very good reason why it's not binding. And then, colleagues, how long does it take to get a first feedback after the applicant sends a request? I think you alluded a little bit earlier as well, yeah?
Yeah, we have weekly meetings, so within 10 days we try to be back. Of course, if it's, I don't know, the holiday season, it might take 2 weeks. But normally within a week, the first feedback is communicated.
And there's another one there about, is there a maximum number of meetings allowed for one SME with multiple innovative projects? Sounds a little bit like a sort of pipeline discussion.
Yes, so there's no maximum number of meetings. What we generally don't allow, sometimes there are exceptions, but we don't want to see the same development twice in an ITF unless everybody agrees, including our scientific advice colleagues and other stakeholders, that there is need of further informal and free of charge support. But we check very carefully as well the previous interactions. So if you had a scientific advice being nationally or from any other competent authority, it's very important to share this with us to better understand where you are, and we take it from there. So if you're an SME and extremely innovative, have different products which are really distinguishing within their innovation, so not that you only have different therapeutic indication, for example, but the really innovation, the molecule is different, then I think we are open to discuss several different developments.
And is the door open for novel excipients?
Yes, we had discussions on novel excipients. The emphasis should be here really a novel. Does it promise to bring something new in terms of therapeutic benefit, in terms of benefit for the affiliated medicine, etc.? And then we are open to excipients, absolutely.
Okay, and I might need help with the next question. ADCs, are you familiar?
Yes, antibody drug conjugates. I think this is what it stands for. And indeed, we do see antibody drug conjugates. Now, again, if it's a development which is not very innovative, or which we have been seen in scientific advice in certain similar developments, I think likely we would refer them. But there is a certain new, I don't know, new conjugation or something really novel which can bring the field forward. We're more than happy to see ADCs.
And again, and it's a very logical question. Leonor set the platform for requesting an SME briefing meeting, you know, once you get a designation, etc. What's the distinction? What's the difference between that offering and the ITF advice meeting?
Very good question. So for the ITF, as the name says, we're trying to look for something which we haven't seen before. So the innovative aspects, there's no guidance available. There is no clear procedure path forward. We are broader. We really look at certain technologies and methods, and therefore open the door here. And I understand as well from Leonor that SME briefing meetings are mainly on the regulatory advice, helping SMEs to go through the, let's be honest, sometimes a bit difficult legislation and guidance we have here as a regulator.
Yeah, and they're not mutually exclusive, guys. It can be. Leonor had that slide about that sort of the snake, you know, going, you know, the undulating wave, as it were, and they're certainly not mutually exclusive. It could even be that an SME briefing orients you for further context downstream, ITF, scientific advice, protocol, orphan designation, etc. So that's really the offering. It's like an a la carte menu in a way. Now, something very specific, are questions, discussions regarding design requirements of potency assays also possible, or are the platforms more suitable for this? And I suppose you can identify what other platforms they might be, Falk. Yeah?
Yes, so potency assays are absolutely within the scope. Again, it has to be something new. So there is, again, the scientific advice on quality only. And here, if it's a potency assay for a product you are requesting or are developing, I think then maybe scientific advice is the better route. But if it's a completely new concept, how to show me this potency of different molecules, I think then we are open. And again, we are liaising very, very well with the CMC colleagues. There is a new institution as well being created, the QIG, the Quality Innovation Group. And this group as well looks at novel manufacturing and novel developments in the CMC area. And we will liaise with them and see at what stage you're in and whether it is something for ITF or maybe for other support mechanisms.
Okay, and the next one, it's an interesting sort of context. Academia writes an innovative clinical trial core protocol for rare disease to test industry-owned compounds and share control groups. Can ITF provide feedback? So that's a complex clinical trial, if ever there was one, potentially.
Very good questions. And indeed, we had, it was not last year, but I think 2 years ago, we had a lot of developments, I think, within the clinical trial area, starting with the basket trials. And we can discuss trial protocols. Now, again, we have to be careful here. Are we talking really about a novel design, or maybe a design where we just want feedback on? If it's a design which we have been seen before, we will liaise with our biostatisticians. And if they say, we have seen something similar already in scientific advice, and it's maybe only the therapeutic area or the compound which is new, then likely we would refer to scientific advice. However, if you come up with something really fancy, how you allocate the certain patients within the protocol, or have new recruitment methods, for example, doing online decentralized clinical trials was very heavy during the pandemic, then we are open. So again, maybe fill out the form. It's a 2-pager or 3-pager, and we take it from there, and we will refer you, I think, to the right support mechanism as necessary.
And then a last closing question, I believe, does because of time, colleagues, not because of lack of questions, does the EMA ITF open to discuss emerging technologies, the non-animal in vitro preclinical models? So please, Falk, yes.
Absolutely. We had an extra laugh starting last year to support the 3 Rs and to support non-animal in vitro preclinical models. We restarted at the agency recently the 3R working party. So we have the experts now available in-house, and we're trying to push this topic very much. It's very much close to the heart from our director, pushing the 3 Rs and the non-animal models in vitro testing. So please come to us. This is a spot-on area we would like to see.
And it's a very hot area, and I believe it's also been supported by our cousins across the Atlantic in the FDA. So there's a lot of pressure in this area, has been for years, but there's renewed energy in this space at the moment. I now have to thank you, I think, Falk, for all of that, both the presentation and the quickfire Q&A. And I believe I hand over now to Barbara to introduce the next sequence.
Yes, thank you very much, Tony. And actually, I want to add that we have quite a few projects in the EIC Pathfinder transition that are focused on addressing exactly the last area. So I thought that Falk's presentation was very informative for the early developers among the audience, and especially for the academic researchers. I just want to add that the ITF service is free for academics researcher. So with that, let's see, please join me in welcoming Igor Balas, professor from the University of Novi Sad. Igor is going to share with us his experience with the ITF service when he was a coordinator of the EIC Pathfinder project, EVO-NANO. Igor, please, the floor is yours.
And thanks for having me. Sorry? Yeah. So I will give you a brief overview of the experience we had when I was leading an EIC-funded project called EVO-NANO. In 2018, within the EVO-NANO project, we started developing a tumor simulator to predict and optimize the effect of nano-delivery systems on tumors. Our initial focus was on nano-delivery systems, but we designed the multi-scale simulator in such a manner to allow simulating the effect of any chemical entity. So the ultimate goal of the project was to use a combination of artificial intelligence and biological simulations to predict treatment effect, but also to optimize those treatments. And the idea was to eventually offer personalized treatment suggestions to patients. Next slide, please. And that was the research part. And it was all good and exciting, but in order to reach practical utilization, we had to focus on applicability in a real clinical setting. That means entering into a domain where actually a lot of scientists do not feel very comfortable. First, we had to make a clear distinction between the technology we are developing and a market-ready product. And since we are in the health domain, which is probably the most stringently regulated field, the essential pillar is whether we are complying with regulatory requirements. And that opened a huge number of questions, such as, are we developing software as a medical device? Does changes in functioning as a result of AI-induced adaptations change regulatory status? What changes in software will require notification to EMA, and so on? And honestly, I was quite overwhelmed with all of this, and I figured that the best way forward is actually to go directly and to ask EMA what do they think about our technology that was at that time still in the very early development. Next slide, please. So we applied to the ITA briefing meeting, and it is defined, as Falk said, as an informal exchange of information and guidance in the development process. And we got exactly that in the best possible way. But before reaching the meeting itself, we had to do a lot of preparatory work through three main steps. First, we made an initial request, and then after it was approved, in the second step, we received a set of documents where the most important one is the briefing document, where we had to outline all the topics we want to discuss with EMA. Then we sent a draft, and only after it was approved, we prepared the final briefing document version. And now, it is quite important to remember that briefing document is really important, that it is expected that you do not only list the topic you want to discuss, but also to outline your stance on each topic and what reasons do you have for that stance, including all the references and evidences you have. Finally, we reached the meeting, and actually, to my very pleasant surprise, we faced a panel of 22 persons from the EMA side. During that meeting, we discussed seven topics from the briefing document, and they covered the current stage of the technology, our ideas for future development, regulatory classifications of our technology, regulatory implications of the use of AI, and so on. We got very precise answers where possible, and in instances where our questions were rather vague, we got a mix of direct advices how to make those issues more precise, and links to additional documents that are related to a particular question. Next slide. After the meeting and after taking some time to process all the new information, I realized that developing a market-ready product is the only way to move novel technology out of the lab and really help society. And actually knowing regulatory requirement is essential for that. So, as a result of the meeting, we first radically redefined intended use and indications for use of our technology. Such redefinition led to small changes within the ongoing project, but to very large changes in the plans for future development, and we implemented them into an EIC transition proposal. Also, in the new Horizon Europe project I'm leading, learning for this EMA experience, we integrated consultations with EMA into the work plan and put it very early in the project, and we also integrated mechanisms to continuously keep an eye on the requirements for market penetrations. So, yeah, thank you.
Very much. Thank you very much, Igor, for this. It was very nice of you sharing your experience with the audience. While we wait for the audience to post their question at Sli.do at #EIC.EMA, I have a question. Both Falk and you mentioned an initial application to the ITF briefing. Were any parts of this application that surprised you? Or can you go maybe a bit more details in these 2-3 pages of application that one has to fill out at the very beginning?
Yeah, I was slightly surprised by the level of details that are expected from me. But it's completely understandable because, as Falk said, we need to explain our stance and why we ask something, so they can offer us best possible advice. So, yeah, that was slightly surprising for me, but otherwise, it was quite smooth journey.
And may I ask you also, when you decided to go to the ITF services, did you contact before EMA through the academic contact point, or you didn't know about it and you just went ahead with the ITF service?
No, I searched for EMA site for that, so that was just direct.
So you didn't go through the academic contact point?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay, thanks. So if there are no other questions from the audience, well, thank you very much, Igor, for sharing your experience. I think it's been actually very clear. That's probably why there are no questions from the audience. Thanks again for sharing with us. And with that, I want to thank again Igor and all the speakers of the first half of this Info Day. And I want to thank also the EMA and the SMEs directors for their support and opening remarks. And thank you, the audience, for your active participation. So we're going to take a short break. Let me look at my watch. We're going to take a 10-minute break. We're going to come back at 10:55. Do not run yet. Just want to remind you to go to Sli.do, #EICEMA, to fill out our survey. If you have not done so, the survey will still open until tonight. And with that, see you at 10:55 sharp. Thanks.
Well, dear colleagues, welcome to, well, the second part of this morning's session after the short break. I hope you managed to get something. Having sort of opened up with the landscape presentation from Leonor and sort of, how you would sort of get SME designation that can open up a lot of the other incentives. We heard then about the ITF sort of briefing possibility from Falk just before the break. The next speaker is Kevin Cunningham, and he's going to talk about a very specific scheme that we've come up with in Europe called the Priority Medicine Scheme, or PRIME for short. And he will go on to explain what it is, the key features of it, as well as its potential benefits. And he can also give you some practical information on how you can prepare to submit a PRIME application if you believe that will facilitate your medicines development program in particular. So Kevin, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this morning. It's really a great pleasure to speak to you all. So indeed, I'm the Prime Scientific Coordinator at EMA, and I've been at the agency since 2015, and actually the majority of my time I've been working with my colleague Spiros Bambakis, who's joining this morning also for this topic, and also Jordanis Gravanis, who's the current head of scientific advice, and who'll give the presentation after this. So I think we're very well represented for this area of the agency's work. And since last year, I've been working as the Prime Scientific Coordinator at EMA. And if I could have the next slide, please. What I'd like to do this morning is to give, as Tony very nicely outlined there, to give you some background on what PRIME is and its origins, how it started. The various entry points now for applicants who are seeking a PRIME designation, the criteria for entry and how the applications are assessed, and then the benefits of PRIME support once an applicant has been designated with the PRIME status. And finally, then some practical tips on how to submit your application and how to strengthen your arguments if you choose to submit the application. So the next slide, please. So first, the background, and this slide starts in 2014, but really, I guess long before 2014, it was evident that there are scientific and regulatory challenges facing medicine developers, depending on the type of medicine that they may be developing. But around this time, 2014, there was a push and an increasing recognition of the need to reinforce this support for developers of new and innovative medicines that are aiming to address major public health needs. So we saw at this time in the US, the breakthrough therapy designation was signed into law in 2012. And also in Japan, their equivalent program, the Sakikage program, was launched in 2014. So from the European side, a group composed of members of the EMA Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, the CHMP, along with EMA representatives, drafted a reflection paper on a potential new priority medicine scheme. And this was drafted in October, outlining the scheme. And then in 2016, the procedure was finalized and the PRIME scheme was launched. So PRIME standing for Priority Medicine Scheme. It's been running since 2016, but I'd like to think we haven't stood still since then, and rather it's an ongoing process of evaluation and evolution of the scheme. And we published a review of the first 2 years of PRIME in 2018, and then also conducted a major analysis of the first 5 years of PRIME in 2021, which actually feeds into how this program will work and improve going forward in 2023 and beyond. So I'll speak a little bit about that later, but for maybe to warm us up, there should be a Sli.do question that maybe we could put on screen. And I hope this is an easy one. So are you aware of the PRIME scheme? And I see already we have quite a number of respondees, but I can maybe leave it to go a little bit until we have a better idea. I should also say that, as my colleague pointed out yesterday, this is specifically for EMA PRIME and not perhaps more famous primes such as Amazon Prime. So do answer carefully, and we try and preserve the integrity of the poll here. But I think as the numbers go up, it's hovering around 2/3 who have heard. So maybe this is a good a good audience then to hear about this, my following slides, because I'll try to give a broad outline of what the scheme is and what it intends, as well as some more specific comments on how to develop your application. Okay, so I presume that the poll will go on running, but let's assume that it's about 2/3 of us are aware. Okay, so we have about 130 respondees, which I guess is maybe a good enough cross section of the audience. So we're at about 1/3 who are aware of the PRIME scheme and 2/3 not. So that's hopefully good scope for some discussion and some questions as well, which I understand you can already submit, and then we'll ensure there's plenty of time to try and address some of those at the end of my talk. So maybe we can stop and move on with the presentation. And I'd like to speak about the goal and the scope of this PRIME scheme. So in a nutshell, PRIME, it aims to foster the development of medicines that have a major public health interest. And it aims to do this in a number of ways. Firstly, to reinforce the scientific and regulatory advice that's available to applicants from regulators and from the EMA, but doing this by fostering and facilitating an early direct interaction between regulators and developers. So this is to begin, I guess, a constant dialogue, but it's also to raise awareness on the regulatory side of these regulatory hurdles, to raise awareness earlier in development and give the chance for developers to mitigate them and address these issues. We aim to optimize development for the robust generation of data, and this needs to be relevant data so that it ensures an efficient development, but also importantly robust and high quality data, because we need this to ultimately support the benefit risk assessment when it comes to the marketing authorization. Now, I should clarify that the PRIME scheme provides enhanced support through dialogue, but it's essentially using the existing regulatory and procedural frameworks that are available in Europe, such as scientific advice and also the accelerated assessment at the marketing authorization stage, which is essentially assessment under an expedited assessment timeline. So a specific goal of PRIME is to enable this accelerated assessment at the time of the MAA, or marketing authorization application. So this is not only through the generation of high quality data that can support a benefit risk assessment, but also should be facilitated by the knowledge that's gained from both developers and regulators through the PRIME scheme and through this information exchange. So the next slide, please. So moving on to the PRIME entry points and the criteria. Overall, the criteria are based similarly on those for accelerated assessment, for those of you who are familiar with those criteria. But the key is that the product should be have the potential to be of a major public health interest, and particularly the potential to address an unmet medical need. So the proposed condition for study and ultimately, I guess, the indication should have either no satisfactory therapies available, or if there are therapies existing, then this promising medicine should be expected to bring a major therapeutic advantage over the existing therapies. And what this requires then normally is a scientific justification based on the available non-clinical and clinical data. And normally, in terms of the clinical data, we expect this to mean that it brings a meaningful improvement in efficacy in this condition. And it could be like the impact on the onset of the effect, or the duration of effect of the medicine, or an improvement in the morbidity or the mortality associated with the condition. Now, this needs to be justified, and if we go to the next slide, please. This unmet medical need criterion needs to be justified in a number of ways. Firstly, what we expect in the application for PRIME is a clear description of the unmet medical need based on the epidemiology for the condition, and this needs to be well justified by the available scientific data in the literature. We also expect the applicants need to consider and provide a description of the available treatment options and the standards of care that are available, and how these options are not being currently met by patients in need. And the second element then is to demonstrate the potential of the medicine to address this need. And that's based on the description of the observed effects to date from the gathered data and the predicted effects, and also the relevance of this data and the expected impact of the availability of this medicine to patients. Now, the specific requirements depend on the point of entry of application, which I can explain in the next slide. So you'll see in the right-hand box here, this is my very basic paradigm for drug development, from early non-clinical development through first-in-human studies, early exploratory trials, and then the pivotal or confirmatory studies. And along this timeline, any sponsor can apply with the criteria on the right here in the darker blue box. So once they are able to demonstrate a sound pharmacological rationale from the non-clinical evidence, and with preliminary clinical data to indicate the efficacy and the safety from exploratory clinical trials, they're able to apply. So the assessment of this promise it's really a case-by-case basis, but what's always common is that the efficacy should indicate a magnitude and a duration of effect, as well as a clinical relevance, and that together indicate a substantial improvement in the therapeutic landscape for patients. Now, on the left-hand side, we have an early entry point for SME developers and for academics. And they can enter at this point, they can enter at the main point if they have sufficient data, but they can also enter earlier when they can demonstrate tolerability at a therapeutic dose in the clinic. So they don't necessarily need to show efficacy. But here the non-clinical evidence must be more compelling to justify entry, with a convincing rationale, pharmacological rationale, but also a clear efficacy in non-clinical models that are relevant to the clinical disease. So these are the two entry points. And if we go to the next slide. So regardless of the entry point, the eligibility procedure is the same, which I'll just go through quickly. But so the application starts with a submission from the applicant, and then we validate in the PRIME team. We validate based on the criteria in my last slide to see if the application is valid. And then for valid applications, we assign an EMA officer and a member of the Scientific Advice Working Party, who both have the relevant therapeutic area expertise to assess the unmet medical need and the data to support this application. So this is, they draft a report, and the report is presented and discussed at the Scientific Advice Working Party after 1 month, or at day 30 in procedural speak. ATMPs are also discussed by the Committee for Advanced Therapies, and then both these groups put forward their proposal to either grant or deny, and this is then discussed at the CHMP. So the CHMP discusses all the products proposed for entry, and then finally gives an outcome letter, which is issued at day 40. So it's essentially a month-and-a-half procedure. So overall, this is a short procedure. There's no requirement for addressing lists of questions. There's no clock stops, so it's quite lean. But I think it really packs a punch, because we have assessment of the medicine by up to 3 scientific committees. Now, if we could take the next slide, please. So moving on to the benefits of PRIME support to those medicine developers who've been granted. Now, this again, going back to my basic paradigm for development, and we expect entry to occur around the exploratory phase. So the benefits below the line here, I can briefly go through. And once they're granted PRIME, they're immediately designated an EMA contact point for the duration of the PRIME scheme, which will either be me or my colleague, Anna Gross. More importantly, probably than our appointment, is the appointment of the CHMP rapporteur, or the CAT rapporteur from the Committee for Advanced Therapies, if the product is an ATMP. And these are these rapporteurs will stay in place from this point until the eventual MAA, and then it's their teams that will do lead the assessment of the marketing authorization application. To start off the dialogue, we hold a kickoff meeting with the applicant, which includes the rapporteur's team, other committee members, and EMA experts as appropriate. And here we discuss the development of the product, and we identify key areas for discussion, either through scientific advice or with other committees, such as the Pediatric Committee or the Committee for Orphan Medicine Products, as appropriate to that product. And then towards the submission of the marketing authorization, applicants will receive confirmation of the accelerated assessment timeline. Next slide, please. Or to move it forward. So at the early end, so we go back, just to show that full slide, indeed. So for the early entry for SME and academics, the key difference is that the initial support on early entry to PRIME is provided by EMA experts. And the focus here is on during an introduction meeting and the subsequent scientific advice is the generation of the exploratory clinical evidence to confirm the potential, at which point they can convert to the full PRIME. Next slide, please. So in terms of the benefit of the PRIME scheme, and we wanted to quantitatively assess benefits in terms of the outcomes at the MAA, and a number of analyses were performed in the 5-year review. And we saw that the greater proportion of PRIME products that are granted marketing or accelerated assessment maintain those timelines throughout the MAA. Roughly half the procedures versus about a third for non-PRIME. And that's on the left side, and it's reflected for SMEs and for non-SME companies. And on the right-hand side, the active assessment time is similar for the procedure, but the clock stops where the applicants are given the time to answer outstanding questions is substantially shorter for PRIME products. Next slide, please. Now, the 5-year review also made a number of recommendations, and these are being implemented this year. There were recommendations around the scoping and the timing of eligibility requests, which is still under discussion. But regarding the flexibility of scientific advice for PRIME applicants, we're now initiating an expedited an expedited scientific advice procedure for PRIME products, which essentially is a shortened timeline for scientific advice. So you get your applicants will receive a formal CHMP advice in a more rapid fashion. With the recommendation from the 5-year review to build knowledge and support the accelerated assessment, we have a couple of initiatives. Firstly, a development tracker and a regulatory roadmap, which will be submitted and maintained by PRIME applicants. The aim here is to outline all of the main interactions to increase knowledge sharing and predictability of these regulatory submissions along the way, and to promote rapporteur involvement. So this is key involvement in scientific advice, but it can be in all the regulatory interactions that an applicant has with EMA. And also then to submit a submission readiness meeting prior to the MAA, which the aim here is to strengthen the engagement in the period after the kickoff meeting up until the MAA. And through this dialogue to promote the initiation and the maintenance of the accelerated assessment timelines and get medicines authorized onto patients faster. Next slide, please. So very briefly, to look at the overall PRIME applications, we see on the left side that roughly 25% of applications are successful. And on the second part, or the lower part, we see that the SMEs actually have the majority of applications compared to other or non-SME companies. And while the rate is a bit lower, what I'd say is that we have a large number of applications granted in SMEs. It's about 40% of all our applications are granted to SME companies. In terms of the product types, which is the graph on the right-hand side, we have about half the products are either ATMPs or biologicals, which probably reflects the more innovative products that we see in this area with these product classes. On the next slide, please. I won't go into a lot of detail on the types of conditions that are granted PRIME, but as you can see here, while oncology is probably most strongly represented, we see a very broad range of indications in the various therapeutic areas. And there is a list maintained on the website, the EMA website, for you to look at, and you can get an idea for the types of indications that are granted Prime, and maybe see if this is relevant to you. Now, for the last part of the presentation, if we go to the next slide, I'd just like to go through a little bit more on what can make a good application and how to ensure the best chance of success. In terms, this is all needs to be justified in a justification document, which is, I'll explain it at the end. But I've gone through the unmet medical needs, so I won't maybe describe that again. But I guess it's just important to say that it needs to be described for all subpopulations that might be relevant to the eventual indication. So it's not just a broad coverall for a specific, for a condition. In terms of the non-clinical data, the supporting, we need to see a convincing pharmacological rationale. So applicants will need to describe the pharmacodynamic studies to support the mechanism, the in vivo pharmacodynamic studies, and argue the relevance of the model of disease. And bearing in mind that this should be of a significant magnitude of effects and at a relevant clinical exposure to support early clinical studies. So these are the types of arguments and justifications required. In terms of the clinical data, on the next slide, please. The idea is that the clinical data should be presented and argued to substantiate the potential to address this unmet medical need. And we say potential because, of course, this is still at an early point in development. So typically we expect to see data showing clinical responses and safety data that indicate a potentially substantial improvement in patients in the targeted condition. The exploratory efficacy data should be on a relevant endpoint, normally a response type endpoint, rather than a pharmacodynamic endpoint, or, for example, the measurement of an enzyme or some sort of marker associated with disease. Often indirect comparisons are used because it needs to be substantiated if the data is uncontrolled or from uncontrolled studies. And as for early data, it's important to have acceptable exposure and tolerability to support further clinical development. So on my last slide, and I'll wrap up quickly because I'm a little bit over, it's important also to describe the overview of the next steps and the expected prime benefit for applicants. So they should describe the types of non-clinical studies still to do, the clinical development plan for their pivotal studies, and overall describe any potential complexities and risks that they feel would require or justify an enhanced dialogue. So the dossier is quite lean. It's on the EMA website. We basically have a justification template, a short pre-submission request form as well, and then the applicant should submit literature references that are relevant to the justification document. So I think that is my last slide, and maybe you can finish off with a final Sli.do poll. And the question is whether you're planning a prime designation. So the options are no, but I would consider, no, I don't consider, and or yes, I'm already planning. And that's quite nice to see, first of all, that of course, depending on the audience, we're maybe not able to be in the position at this point to apply, but I'm very happy to see that the majority would at least consider applying. And there are even 10% of the audience are actually planning a prime application. So that's also very, very good to see. Now we have 70 respondents, but Tonya, I appreciate that we're probably running a little bit short, and we want to ensure we have questions and answers available. So I don't know if perhaps we'd like to move on to that.
Yeah. Are you closed now, Kevin? Yeah. Are you the last slide? You're closed.
That's my last slide. So yeah.
No, thanks very much for that, Kevin. And indeed, I mean, it's a good indicator, and I think the poll builds up even in the background. But as you said, the fact that people are interested in it is really great. And before we get into the Q&A, which are flooding in, I just want to introduce to join us, Kevin, Dr. Spiros Vambakis, and Spiros is our senior scientific advisor at the agency. He's currently attached to the CHMP, who are the licensing committee on all these marketing authorizations, the prime licensing committee we have. in the agency, but he's got vast experience both in scientific advice, which we'll hear about in a short while from Jordanis, but also in the sort of the birth of the whole PRIME scheme. So we're very grateful to have Spiros joining us. And I would suggest, Kevin, if you'll allow, we can alternate the quick fire responses between yourself and Spiros just to proceed then with those questions. One thing, just as a point of clarification, colleagues, before we bring up or if we can start to bring up the questions, is PRIME is not for everybody. Like, whereas, the offerings that Leonor and Falk were talking before the coffee break are very broad offerings, and pretty much open to everybody. PRIME is a rather specific scheme. So, and you could even see that from the metrics that Kevin was presenting, and it's very much focused on this sort of fast, dynamic sort of contribution to unmet medical need. And when you get a PRIME designation, it's a public thing. But if you ask and don't get, it's not. It's a private thing. And that's not to say that there's no value or innovation in those that ask and don't receive. It's just the fact that it is a sort of restricted application scheme. And I think that's very, very important to walk away from this info day. It's not to sort of say then that, the whole idea is not to discourage all those additional developments. It's just to particularly, it's an incentive for a specific subset of medicine product development that we really think should be facilitated to reach the patients. So it should be thought of in the positive rather than in a classification into the negative as well. But we'll probably come out with that sort of understanding even in the Q&A. But I think it's an important preface, though. So if I go to the first one, and again, Spiros, just to introduce yourself maybe to the audience, do you want to cover the very first point there? Does PRIME cover medical devices at this point?
Hi, I'm Spiros Vakas, and Tony has introduced me and my roles in the agency. No, PRIME does not cover medical devices disconnected from the development of medicinal product, but certainly PRIME covers medical devices developed together with a medicinal product. We don't assess, though, the medical device part as we assess the medicinal product part. What Tony said is very important. So some of you may think that 25% acceptability or positive outcomes is rather low. It is not, because it's about potential for game-changing, potential for really having a major impact. It's not a potential for having a positive benefit risk and benefit the patients and come on the market. So that is something which is, I understand that every refusal is focused on refusal, and then you may think that a refusal, but the refusal is here just on the game-changing part of the product and also on the availability of data, as Kevin mentioned. It may be too early and we don't have enough data.
Thanks very much for that, Spiros. And indeed, that covers the first two questions. I don't know if the colleagues can bring up the next two in the sequence then. And as I say, so Kevin, can you address, you cannot apply at the preclinical stage. I think you explained in your presentation the different points of application. So maybe expand on that, please.
Yes, indeed. So maybe if the question is purely preclinical, then the answer is no, because for SME applicants and academics, they can apply with the majority of the evidence being in preclinical, but there also needs to be some tolerability data from early clinical studies. So not necessarily proof of concept and proof of efficacy in the clinic, but there needs to be accompanying early pharmacokinetic data just to understand that the preclinical data is that may be convincing is actually relevant, or can at least be the drug can be administered at clinically relevant exposure. So not purely on preclinical, but for the early entry, the great majority of the argumentation for the promising medicine comes from preclinical. So I hope that's clear.
No, thanks for that, Kevin. And Spiros, can I invite you to address the next two, even though the latest because basically it's the imaging technique. Could it be applied for PRIME and the unmet medical need of patients for immunotherapy selection? But also, is PRIME applicable only for specific drug candidates or possible to apply with platform technologies? So I think the two are two sides of the same coin, if you can address that, Spiros.
Yes, Tony. PRIME is applicable for specific drug candidates or for combination of medicinal products also. Because PRIME is help towards a good development, towards a marketing authorization. And we authorize medicinal products. An imaging technique only validated in retrospective clinical studies, it is not subject of PRIME. And we understand the unmet medical need, and the question is very good, but this is not part of PRIME. An imaging technique can be part of a qualification procedure which Iordanis is going to address in the scientific advice presentation.
Yeah, and similar with platform technologies as well. Thank you. Yeah, Kevin, does PRIME cover rare diseases?
Very much so, yeah. So often it's rare diseases that have a very high unmet medical need. And there's lots of reasons for this, but the whole basis for the orphan designation legislation is to try and incentivize medicine developers to develop in rare diseases where otherwise maybe their investment wouldn't be justified by the return because the population is so small. So often very high unmet medical need in rare diseases. And then this makes that part of the argumentation perhaps more compelling. And as long as they can indicate from their own clinical, non-clinical data that the unmet need may be met, then absolutely. And you'll see from, again, if for anybody who wishes to look at the list, you'll see a number of rare diseases that are in the PRIME, products covering rare diseases that are already in the PRIME scheme.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And if I can invite you to bridge to the next one, because what key criteria to differentiate a successful application for orphan designation versus PRIME, if you can maybe expand on that.
Yeah, well, so there are a lot of similarities, in fact, because at the point of an orphan designation, now I should say at the orphan designation and not at the point of the MAA where the orphan designation would be maintained. Orphan designation is often quite an early point in the regulatory interactions with EMA. So it's of a similar sort of criteria related to the unmet medical need and the potential to fulfill that unmet medical need. So actually the criteria are quite similar, and it's just that the basis, I suppose, is a legal basis for orphan designation, whereas PRIME is an enhanced regulatory support. And as I said from my previous question, a lot of orphan designated products are eligible for PRIME and many hold a PRIME. So I guess perhaps I can also, or we can direct you to the relevant guidance for both orphan designation and PRIME to see what the specific requirements are. But I think some of a successful application would actually have quite a lot in common with the two procedures.
Indeed, but in terms of sets, if you actually analyze the data sets, there's a hell of a lot more products with orphan designation than there are with the PRIME. So to some extent, you can be both orphan and PRIME, and indeed you can be PRIME and not orphan. But the orphan PRIME products are a subset of those products who are orphan. So it's a bigger there are differences in the criteria, and it is all about that contribution to the unmet medical need and the probability of success with that. If I can do one or two more questions, Spiros, do you want to take possibility to consult PRIME prior to the PRIME request to check eligibility? How would you get guidance on making a PRIME application?
Yes, very, very short comment on the difference between orphan and PRIME designations. We can say that the orphan designation has a lower bar. This is why we have so many. The orphan designation, for example, can be based on the effects on a biomarker, on an enzyme or another protein, which may be linked to the disease without clinical data. That's why we have so many more. And yes, we can consult the EMA, and you're invited to consult the EMA. And you have here Kevin, who is the prime coordinator. Kevin mentioned also Anna Gross, which is the alternate, and maybe we can send these names also. And I am available also to be contacted for any question you are having. So we are open, and we would like to, the fact that we don't have legislation makes it more important that you have the possibility to contact us.
And maybe, Kevin, can you just as a close now, can you just clarify that the advantage of PRIME over accelerated assessment? So just to resolve that, please, yeah? And then we will have to close, unfortunately. Yeah.
So quickly, I could say that accelerated assessment is a pathway through the actual licensing procedure in which the timelines for that review are shortened. So this is within the marketing authorization, whereas the PRIME is a whole range of support mechanisms prior to the MAA. So it's from early development to the point where the marketing authorization is submitted. So there's an advantage in, but they're actually, I guess, quite different things, because accelerated assessment is within the review, but the advantage to the applicant is that the procedure is shorter and they receive their opinion more quickly. The advantage of PRIME is all the things I mentioned through my presentation, which are these enhanced support mechanisms. So a different advantage, but it will cover the evidence generation phase of that medicine development. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for that, Kevin. And colleagues, again, a lot more questions asked than we were able to address openly, but we will commit to give you written answers to those. And indeed, Spiros has highlighted the various contact points, Kevin himself being the primary, no pun intended. But we now need to move on, and Spiros will be with us as a panelist for the next session. But so we're developing it into the scientific advice, which there's no doubt is a major flagship procedure in the agency in terms of what we offer to the global development community. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Jordanis Gravanis, who's the head of that scientific advice office at the agency. And he will give you hopefully some useful information on what this procedure can bring to the development of your product or technology, as well as practical considerations. So please, Jordanis, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, everyone, from me as well. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the framework of the EMA scientific advice, and it's a pleasure, as Tony mentioned, to have Spiros, in the panel discussion, who has led and actually developed or led the development of the scientific advice framework for 16 years before handing over the bat to me. So if I can have my first slide, please. So I'm going to talk about three different things. One is what is scientific advice, and some of the messages already have been conveyed in previous presentations. So I'll try to skip over them relatively quickly. Then I'm going to talk about how scientific advice at EMA works, what is the procedure, the process in place, and then I'm going to talk about some of the variations of this process that we have developed over years in order to adapt to different needs, different types of products, different types of applicants. So I will start with what is scientific advice, and I can have the next slide. So, as already mentioned potentially briefly, scientific advice is regulators' advice on the different tests and trials that are necessary in order to demonstrate the quality, safety, and efficacy of medicinal products, and eventually to help ascertain what are the benefits and the risks associated with the use of the product, and whether the balance between the two is favorable, which means that we should have eventually an authorization. So, as Tony said, we're not here to act as a consultancy for the companies, but because you have very good experts, at applicant side on this, but we're here to clarify the different scientific requirements for the marketing authorization. And this could be on any part of the drug development process, on every part of the dossier that's supposed to accompany a marketing authorization application, starting from the pharmaceutical quality, the non-clinical, including animal studies and also clinical trials. We offer advice on the methodology and whether the methodology that you plan to apply in your different tests and trials is appropriate and would satisfy regulatory requirements. And we can even provide advice on risk management plans and post-authorization follow-up. So scientific advice is relevant not just for the initial authorization. No, if I can stick to the previous slide, please. Okay, yes, thank you. So not only to the initial authorization, but also post-authorization changes like extensions of indication. We are happy to discuss different types of marketing authorization, like conditional, exceptional circumstances, development for special types of products like generics, hybrids, and biosimilars, as well as pediatric developments. Now, scientific advice is prospective in nature, which means that it focuses on the development plan, what the company, the applicant plans to do in order to gather the evidence necessary to authorize the drug. And it's not meant to pre-evaluate the data that support the marketing authorization application. This is happening at the stage of the marketing authorization application. And scientific advice takes the form of specific questions that the applicant is asking, and which we are called to answer, following obviously some background information in the form of a briefing document, very much similar to what is happening with, for example, ITF briefing meetings mentioned, and also Prime. If I can have the next slide, please. So based on what I mentioned already, these are, for example, typical questions that are obviously relevant and important for scientific advice in relation, in this case, to clinical studies. Questions about the patient population to be included in a pivotal, in any clinical study. What are the endpoints to be used? What are the statistical analysis that is planned to be used? Duration of the study, sample size, the choice of the comparator, because as we know, authorization of medicines generally requires randomized controlled clinical trials, and also, as mentioned, plans to then address the long-term safety and follow-up of the product. If I can have the next slide. Now, perhaps the most common question that we see in scientific advice is, however, whether a study, a set of studies, or an overall development plan is adequate to support the marketing authorization. That's a very fair question. It focuses on prospective planning aspects. However, it is rather general, so we try to stay away a bit from like completely open, questions, or we ask you to actually, highlight potentially specific elements that you would like for us to focus in our answers. And as I said, we're not here to kind of assess, data. Therefore, another type of question that we see, quite commonly, whether, for example, some study results or an overall completed development plan, say non-clinical development plan, is adequate to support market authorization, is not a question that we consider as acceptable, because effectively it requires pre-assessment of existing data. The answers, if you think about it, the answers that could be given to such a question are relatively low value, because effectively what we will say is, well, you've completed your development. Effectively, this is a matter of assessment at the time of marketing authorization application, whether this will indeed suffice for authorization. Now, there's also another type of developments where we are in a bit of a trouble, so to speak, and this is pediatric developments. Now, scientific advice is very much available for people developing medicines for children, and you can always come and ask questions about these developments. However, because there is a specific legal framework related to pediatric developments, and there is a specific committee, the pediatric committee, which is tasked with agreeing with the applicant the overall pediatric development plan, we try to stay away from questions that fall directly under the remit of the PDCO, the pediatric committee. Therefore, if you come and say, this is our plan, pediatric plan, do you think that this would cut it, would give us an indication in whatever subset of the pediatric population? This is a question that we wouldn't actually be able to answer in scientific advice, because it is a question for the PDCO. On the other hand, any question on any design aspect of a study that you plan to do, whether part of an agreed a pediatric investigation plan or not, is obviously a very fair question for scientific advice. And if I can have the next slide. Now, we often also, you may have heard the term protocol assistance. What is protocol assistance? Protocol assistance is scientific advice, but specifically for products that are orphan designated. Okay, it's a different name for pretty much the same thing. The difference, as already mentioned by Leonor, is that it then benefits from fee incentives of the orphan legislation. I'll refer to that a little further down my presentation. And in terms of content, it, in addition to any other question on the development as mentioned until now, it can also include questions on the significant benefit of the orphan designated product versus established therapy. So, as mentioned, significant benefit is an important criterion for a drug to be designated as orphan. I may be targeting an orphan indication, but if there's no potential for me to show, if I'm using paracetamol as an example to treat ALS, yes, it's targeting a very rare, very devastating disease. But what's the potential for paracetamol to have an effect? I'm sure we would have discovered it if there was one. So it's important to demonstrate the significant benefit. And at the time of designation, because it happens early on in the development of the product, there's as Spiro said, it can be this acceptability. Okay, there may be a significant benefit here. Can be based on very slim data. At the time of marketing authorization, this will have to be confirmed. So the company, the applicant, needs to have a plan as to how they plan to demonstrate the significant benefit. And obviously, this is a very fair, object for scientific advice. The next slide, please. And then what is broad scientific advice? So this has been in place now for a number of years. So I'll start by saying that scientific advice is generally product specific, but also indication specific. So if you want to get advice on 2 separate indications, we will ask you to submit 2 separate applications. However, there are situations where specific issues may affect multiple products or multiple indications. Say, for example, that you are planning to introduce, you have a number of products on the market, you plan to introduce a new manufacturing site where multiple products will be affected. You have questions about how to effectively register this manufacturing site. So this would be an object for broad scientific advice. Similarly, you may be planning a platform clinical trial where multiple products will be used, in a specific clinical context. Again, it involves multiple products. This is something that we would accept as a broad scientific advice. Importantly, questions need to be relating to this specific topic. So we wouldn't allow you to take the opportunity of that advice, of that request, broad scientific advice request, to ask questions on any one of the different, for example, indications or any one of the different products, like specifically. Okay, it has to be on the platform side. It has to be on the manufacturing side. Something that was mentioned in the Q&A right before, the problem with the use of immunotherapies and the different thresholds that have been used with different assets. So that would potentially be like a very good question for a broad scientific advice, if not for a qualification, as Spiros mentioned. And the next slide. So what would be the incentive for somebody to ask for scientific advice? Why come for scientific advice? Scientific advice, as mentioned, is not mandatory. It's foreseen in the legislation, but it's a voluntary process, and it even incurs fees. So why would anyone pay for scientific advice? Well, from analysis that we've made, it's been shown that complying with scientific advice, not necessarily not just requesting, but requesting and eventually following scientific advice, is a predictor for marketing authorization success. So if you ask for scientific advice and you follow it, you increase your chances of your marketing authorization application eventually being successful. There's been 2 publications, 3 actually, including one for orphan designated products on this, and there's another one with kind of more recent data in preparation. The same analysis have shown of particular relevance potentially for today's conference, that orphan products and small medium enterprise applicants are generally less likely to succeed in their marketing authorization application. So there's a bit of a lower success rate. However, still for these types of applicants, for these types of products, requesting and complying with scientific advice does increase the chances of market. So there's a clear benefit because obviously, if you consult the regulators as what would be their requirements in order to approve a drug, and you follow those recommendations, obviously, it's more likely that the evidence generated will comply with these requirements in the end. And the next slide, please. So having gone through the what is scientific advice, I'm going to talk now a bit about the process for scientific advice. So scientific advice is provided by a designated standing working party, which is called the Scientific Advice Working Party. The sole remit is actually to provide scientific advice. It is a working party of the licensing committee that Tony mentioned, and multiple people actually, the CHMP, or Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, which committee is actually formally responsible for providing scientific advice. So the outcome, the advice that the applicant gets at the end comes formally from the CHMP, but it's prepared by the SOP. The Scientific Advice Working Party meets 11 times per year, so once a month, except in August. There's like 36 members and 36 alternates, so a large number of people of different expertise. Their nomination is based on their expertise and the expertise needs that we see in incoming applications. It also includes representatives for various EMA committees, not just the CHMP, but also the Pharmacovigilance Committee, the Pediatric Committee, the Committee Advanced Therapies, and the Orphan Committee. Now, what happens is that for each application that we receive, we appoint 2 members of that from the working party as the primary reviewers, as coordinators, as we say. They do the primary assessment of the request, and then at the following meeting of the working party, the request is being discussed on the basis of 2 separate assessment reports that the 2 coordinators have prepared. At that point, we also appoint a third, at least one more member of the working party as peer reviewer, and the peer reviewer, along with the 2 coordinators, is responsible following the working party discussion to ensure that the final advice follows the discussion and the direction given in the plenary meeting. Now, we also have involvement of other committees, working parties, operational expert groups, working groups, all kinds of different types of expert bodies into scientific advice, usually in the form of peer reviewers that are appointed by them and who also contribute in this peer review process. And in the following slide, so the procedure, the process for scientific advice starts obviously, with the submission of a request. So for the submission, for 2 years now, a little over 2 years now, we're using an online platform which is called IRIS. It has facilitated quite a bit the processing of the applications. But there's a couple of things to take into account here, and that is that the organization of the applicant, the person who's making the application, also the active substance contained in the drug and the drug itself needs to be registered with the EMA. And there's links and references here to help you with that registration of all of these things, and also the overall registration process. In addition to that, you also need to apply for what we call a research product identifier from the agency, and this is a unique number attributed to your development, and which helps us track all the regulatory activities. Eventually, will allow us to track all the regulatory activities of that product. So not just scientific advice, but any interaction with the agency. So for now, it's scientific advice, orphan designation, and ITF briefing meetings that are tracked through that. But eventually, everything, including the marketing authorization and post-authorization lifecycle management, will be handled through IRIS. So for further information and training, there are some links, and I hope that the presentations will be made available for these links to also be available to people. Quickly through the procedure, we have once you submit your application, we spend a month more or less to validate it, and then we spend another month and a half in a 40-day procedure in order to assess it. Sometimes in 5% of the cases, we will actually request a meeting with the applicant before we finalize the advice, and that will add another month to the procedure. So we're talking about either a 40 or a 70-day procedure. And in the next slide, as already mentioned, scientific advice does incur fees depending on the type and the number of the areas of advice, quality, non-clinical, clinical. It was asked before, the fee levels currently range for anywhere between 40-something to almost 90,000 euros per request, depending on the areas of advice. There is, however, a new proposal from the Commission which simplifies a bit the structure and changes the fee level. So this is a bit of a in change, in transition. But importantly, there's free incentives for the pediatric-only developments, which are free of charge, but also for protocol assistance for SME applicants for ATMP and prime products. And there's also fee waivers for orphan products that are developed from academic applicants, as well as requests on the clinical development of products addressing public health emergencies. Okay, and next slide. So in terms of variations of the advice process, and a bit conscious of the time, I'm probably not going to mention everything, but there are like a few different flavors of the process that have been developed over the years. Qualification of novel methodologies and of biomarkers is a relatively, separate, process which is not meant to aid the development of products per se, but of methodologies that support drug development. Things that could go under qualification are biomarkers, surrogate clinical endpoints, clinical outcome assessment measures like patient-reported outcomes, and also disease and patient registries. Qualification is a relatively complicated process. It requires meta-analysis of multiple data sources. And in terms of process, it follows by default a 70-day procedure. So there's always a discussion meeting. Next slide. Another variation of the scientific advice process is parallel scientific advice with the FDA. So we can have a process in parallel with the FDA. Again, it's a by default 70-day procedure. So there is a discussion meeting. It's actually a tripartite meeting between EMA, FDA, and the applicant. And it's intended to align, if possible, the regulatory recommendations of FDA and EMA. Although that's not a given that it will happen. Each agency maintains its separate position if necessary. Similarly to that, and if I can have the next slide, we have a parallel. We call it joint scientific consultation with HTA, health technology assessment bodies, again, in an attempt to a bit harmonize the requirements between drug regulators and health technology assessment bodies. Again, there's a 70-day procedure with a discussion meeting, a tripartite meeting with HTA bodies, the EMA, and the applicant. The next slide. For public health emergencies, we actually have a completely separate process which doesn't involve the scientific advice working party, but recently constituted due to COVID-19 emergency task force of the EMA. The ETF is this is meant for obviously pathogens that cause do cause like a declared public health emergency, but also have a potential to cause a public health emergency. You can contact the ETF for early interactions in advance of a formal scientific advice procedure. And during a public health emergency, as was the case during COVID, we follow an accelerated timetable. We offer fee waivers for this, and we make sure to involve national competent authorities for the authorization of clinical trial applications in relation to the public health emergency. Last but not least, in the next slide, we have scientific advice on medical devices. This is a relatively new thing. It's not fully established yet. But we are going to run at least one pilot, potentially a second pilot during 2023. So first of all, there's scientific advice on high-risk medical devices from the medical device expert panels that the EMA has the secretariat of. This is intended for class 3 medical devices and class 2B medical devices, as I mentioned, high risk. It doesn't cover in vitro diagnostics. Unfortunately, this is outside the scope. This is based on the relevant, legal provisions. The advice is meant to be on the clinical development strategy, the proposals for clinical investigations, and we have a number of expert panels in different areas of medicine. All of them could be used to get the scientific advice. So we will have a pilot, as I mentioned, during 2023. We're planning to have 10 applications. The focus is mainly on the so-called orphan, pediatric, and also breakthrough devices for unmet medical need. SMEs are much encouraged to participate, and for now this advice is free of charge, and the outcome will not be published, due to its confidential nature. But eventually, once this becomes fully operational, there will be some fees and an amendment of the fee regulation to account for that. EMA is also intending to explore scientific advice on drug-device combinations during 2023, and we're going to have a focus group, with relevant people during the year in order to see how this could work. Importantly, scientific advice questions, on medical devices already are being asked and are being accepted in scientific advice requests, and we try to address them to the extent possible. Again, talking about questions on devices to be used in combination with medicinal products. Okay, and I guess I'm going to skip that and go to the final slide as some take-home messages. So scientific advice constitutes the core of regulatory support during medicines development. The wording of the questions is quite critical for the applicant to make best use of scientific advice. It's worth coming for scientific advice because you increase your chances of success. You have to be quite, well prepared in your submission. So pre-anticipate, technical issues. And we're here, obviously, to support with all of this. And as I mentioned, scientific advice framework has been evolving over the years. It offers, besides the kind of standard process, a number of different opportunities, to address different needs. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. More resources here if you want to get, support.
Yeah. No, thanks very much for that, Jordanis. And honestly, guys, we could have run a dedicated information day on the scientific advice provision itself because of it's got a very long history since the start of the agency 25 years ago or more even. And it's evolved in a number of offerings. And indeed, you'll hear from one or more users later on today. But we have some time now. I know there's loads of questions that have been piling in on the Sli.do, so I'm asking the colleagues to pull them up. So quick fire responses, Jordanis, that we can consume as much as possible. Over to you. Quick fire, yeah?
Yes.
Does EMA provide advice for medical device development? Your last slide, second last slide, yeah?
I think I mentioned that, yes, not for every single device, specific types of devices in line with the agency remit in scientific advice, in medical devices.
And a next one, a very interesting one. How can an applicant ensure a live discussion rather than only advice in writing?
As I said, it's a small subset, 5% of applications that get a discussion meeting. I think that, well, there's no guarantee really. You can plan for you can ask for a parallel scientific advice with FDA or with HTAs because that will ensure a discussion meeting. But then the logistical burden associated with that is not insignificant because obviously you're preparing two separate submissions. So it's quite heavy, but.
But the assumption that live is better is not borne out by those publications that you referred to, because, as you say, the majority then is through written exchange. The next one, academic consortium, clinical trial protocol, rare disease, industry-owned compounds, sounds like repurposing to me, but what do you think?
So we had indeed a pilot on repurposing, which we accepted applications over the course of last year. In principle, we're open to, this type of request, again, would be like a very good candidate for a broad scientific advice. We can try to see, the problem usually really is the fees. But we can see, depending on, I don't know, the situation, whether we could, grant the fee exemption or something like this. But if fees is not the problem because there's funding from somewhere, obviously broad scientific advice is more than welcome.
Yeah, and the next two really, medical devices, without development, I think we can address. But look at the bottom, which is application process for the pilot scheme. So if you just expand briefly on that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not familiar myself, but if you go onto our website under medical devices, it is mentioned the scientific advice from the expert panels is being mentioned. There's the material there, the application form, all of the instructions on how to apply. For now, it's not through this IRIS platform. It's just like you fill out the form and you send it in, and the colleagues in the Secretariat of expert panels will be more than happy to help you. And actually, Tony, maybe to answer the top question, this device, this type of advice from the expert panels is mainly, if not exclusively, targeted to standalone devices without medicinal, because the types of devices, these high-risk devices, are devices that are generally used on their own, not in together, not in combination with a medicinal product. Yeah,
which we covered earlier this morning. Costs involved for scientific advice, you referred to them briefly, but the emphasis is on the reductions really for a lot of the guys on this call, I believe.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So can we have a look at some more, guys? Scientific advice cover regulatory and ethical requirements. That's a good question.
So in terms of purely regulatory questions, we don't accept. Well, we don't accept. We address them in parallel. We remove them out of it because if they're not scientific, well, there's no point in bringing them to the Scientific Advice Working Party. But as EMA Secretary, we respond to regulatory questions in parallel. Ethical requirements. I guess this refers to kind of possibly ethics committees, and so advice in advance of clinical trial applications. This is theoretical. Formally, the authorization of clinical trials is in the remit of the national competent authorities. We do get questions in relation to clinical trials in scientific advice because ultimately these trials are meant to support the marketing authorization application. We don't have like a specific link to the ethics committees yet, but through the Act-EU, different avenues are being explored, both through simultaneous national scientific advice, but also through centralized scientific advice. So this is work in progress, I would say.
Yeah. And the next one, I think you addressed to a point, is protocol assistance for orphan drugs limited to protocol advice for that trial, or does it apply to advice on the full drug development plan?
The full drug development. Yeah, no, the full drug development plan. Absolutely, okay. Everything. Same as any other product. Yeah.
Yeah. And the very bottom question there, is there a waiting list before EMA can schedule a scientific advice meeting with the applicant? Might refer to some recent difficulties we had broadband-wise, yeah?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't call it a scientific advice meeting because, as we said, chances are, in most cases, you'll get only written responses. Well, we've faced some difficulties and some postponements during the pandemic, but we have reduced this like to a very low level. I can't say that we've kind of completely eradicated them, but in general, very, very few applications these days, less than, I don't know, 5 per month, need to be postponed to the following month. And at most, we're talking about 1 month of delay, not more than that.
And maybe, Jordanis, you didn't mention any metrics, but just to give the colleagues a flavor of the volume that you're dealing with on a monthly basis, approximately.
The volume is around 70 applications, so to speak, per month. 70, 75, including the qualification, I would say, yeah, 75.
And another familiar question we often get about the binding nature of scientific advice, and it goes back to those references, I think, bibliography in your presentation.
Yeah, so scientific advice is by no means binding, but as shown, if you comply with it, then you increase your chances of success. So, but yeah. It's totally, as it is voluntary, it's also non-binding.
Okay, then, and I think we've already answered the pilot scheme, so if we can get rid of that, that'll be helpful. And we also answered that one. If we get rid of that, can be helpful. Okay, what's the difference between protocol assistance and scientific advice? I mean, it's yeah.
So I don't know. Spiros, I think, has raised his hand. Spiros, was it in relation to a question? Mm-hmm.
Advice is scientifically binding. That is, if you advise on something and you come to the CHMP, you cannot change it unless the science has changed, and the science does not change within 3 or 5 years.
Exactly. So yeah,
give a more positive twist on the binding. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've had rare situations where companies came like 10 years after the advice, and of course the field had moved on. But that's like that's an exception really. Difference between advice and protocol assistance: scientific advice for non-orphan products, protocol assistance for orphan products. No other change. It's just a difference in name, plus the fact that with protocol assistance you can ask the specific questions about how to demonstrate significant benefit in order to maintain your orphan designation, which they simply don't apply to non-orphan products. Yes.
Okay. And does the active substance need to be finalized for scientific advice, or can scientific advice occur in earlier stages of drug development? I mean,
no, it can occur at any stage of drug development. Yeah. And what happens though is that obviously, the name of the substance, the name of the product, evolves over time. And that's why we need this research product identifier that I mentioned, this unique identifier, to be able to keep track, because, the same product will come under different names over the course of the development.
Okay, and we're coming to a close, guys, in terms of the time slot. Would our advice relevant to discuss potentially reduced data set requirements to support platform basket product registration, or would ITF be more appropriate, bearing, and are they indeed mutually exclusive?
No, they're not mutually exclusive. As Falk explained, you know, in ITF you would go if you have something which is really kind of innovative, not before seen. If it's like, which we have seen in scientific advice, multiple proposals for platform you know, trials, you're more than welcome to come to scientific advice. We'll treat it as a broad advice because usually it would involve multiple products, but you know, scientific advice is the place to go.
And a very interesting question. If an agreed PIP and positive results on those clinical studies, could this be considered the development plan de facto sufficient for the CHMP for a pediatric-only MA?
Well, in theory, an agreed PIP is a plan that should support the marketing authorization. The results are positive, okay, but then the interpretation of what constitutes positive results or, you know, convincing results is up to the CHMP. So I guess the proof is in the pudding, and we can only know when, you know, these results come for a marketing authorization application, or, you know, whether, you know, they suffice to provide a pediatric indication.
Indeed, plan is one thing, evidence is another. And just the last closing question is, what about our relationships with FDA? We refer to parallel scientific advice, but it's not a high volume activity. Do we share outside of that?
I would say that scientific advice is rarely a topic for cluster meetings with the FDA, but if there is interest from one or the other side, yes, of course. So, for example, we've had cases where you know, we wanted to advise something, and then there was this interesting or different view from the FDA. So we discussed this bilaterally with our FDA colleagues, you know, before giving the advice. So it could happen.
Okay, good. No, unfortunately, Jordanis, we have to close it there, but thank you very much for your active engagement with that quick fire session. So I hand over the floor now to Barbara, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, Jordanis. That was indeed very informative. I just want to remind the audience that we are going to post a link to the slides and to today's recording at our event website. So all the useful links that the speakers have put in their presentation will be available to you as well. And with that, now we are going to hear how Ability Pharma, a company that has been funded under the EIC Accelerator, has taken advantage of the scientific advice for its own drug development process. And with that, I would like to introduce you to the CEO of Ability Pharma, Dr. Carles Domenech, and to the Vice President in Clinical and Regulatory Affairs, Dr. Gemma Fiero. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It is a pleasure that Ability Pharma has been invited to the presentation. Thank you. Our company is based in Barcelona and is developing a drug, ABTL0812, that selectively kills cancer cells through autophagy, which is an innovative mechanism of action. The product is already in phase 2B with a double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial in pancreatic cancer. Sorry?
We cannot see our slides now. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Yes, the product is already in phase 2B clinical trials with a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial in pancreatic cancer that is currently ongoing in the United States, Spain, France, and Israel. We also have positive results from a previous clinical trial in endometrial and lung cancer that was a phase 2A clinical trial. We submitted for the SME status at EMA in 2012, and we got it, and we have been keeping it. And we also have 3 orphan drug designations, including pancreatic cancer. And as Barbara commented, we got an EIC accelerated pilot grant of 5.2 million euros in 2020. Next slide, please.
In this slide, it is shown our interactions with the EMA during the different phases of development of our product ABTL0812. Those in black are the ones that ended successfully, and in gray you can see the ones that our goal was not achieved. Now we are going to review some of them in detail. Next slide, please. In 2011, when our drug was in early preclinical phase, we requested the orphan drug designation for pancreatic cancer. The timeline shows the different steps of the procedure. We had a hearing during the COMT meeting in April 12, and at that moment the company decided to withdraw the application of the orphan drug designation. The reason was to avoid a rejection of the ODD as the available data to show significant benefit were not enough. Please keep in mind that at that time our drug was in a very early stage. Next slide, please. What we learned from this experience was that pre-submission meetings are really valuable to prepare the submission, but they do not guarantee a positive outcome. It is very important that you identify the submission weaknesses and to anticipate potential questions related with them. As I mentioned previously, significant benefit is key. Another thing, it's important to mention that meetings with the MEA are really recommended, as you can receive high quality feedback that in our case was really useful to prepare the reapplication of the ODD with more solid data. And another tip, if you're planning to go ahead with the same ODD for the FDA, you don't need to demonstrate significant benefit. Next slide, please. So we try again in 2017 and we request the orphan drug designation for pancreatic cancer. In that case, the procedure went very well and the orphan drug was granted on the expected date. So tips for ODD maintenance. Keep in mind that it's necessary to renew your application every year by submitting an annual report. And it's important to test the IT requirements, the systems, for example, IRIS, which is the system that currently uses EMA for submission of this information. Next slide, please. So our next interaction with the EMA was protocol assistance and is related with the clinical trial ongoing. As mentioned before, this clinical now is ongoing in several countries, in Spain and France, in the European Union, US, and also in Israel. The company aim is to convert this clinical trial into a pivotal one and to request an accelerated approval in 2025. Next slide, please. So we applied for protocol assistance 2 years ago, and it was mainly with clinical questions, and most of them were related with the conversion of the trial into an adaptive one. This procedure took place in 2021 during COVID pandemic, and all the interactions we had with the EMA were in writing. As you can see in the timeline, after receiving the final response from EMA, we have to request a clarification because one of the response was not clear enough for us. Next slide, please. So the feedback we received was very useful and permitted us to redesign the ongoing clinical trial to obtain a potential accelerated approval. One important thing is that you formulate clear questions and to present the company position unambiguously to avoid misunderstanding. And we strongly recommend that you obtain a meeting with the EMA and to have the opportunity to interact with them either by video conference or face-to-face, as these interactions are crucial to present the case to avoid potential misunderstandings and in fact, at the end, to delay the final response. And that's all from our side. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
To our audience to learn a real life example of what the company had to go through and how it benefited from the services. I don't know if there are questions yet from the audience, but if they're not, I can start with you. Gemma, can you please maybe clarify what was the early stage that you, how early was your clinical development when you applied for the first time to ODD? Do you mean that you were still in preclinical studies?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, at that time we have only preliminary data. Most of, well, all were preclinical. We didn't have any clinical data yet, and the preclinical was not so strong, obviously, that we have right now.
Okay. And based on your experience, do you think that if you had strong preclinical studies, would that be sufficient, or based on the feedback you got from EMA, some phase 1 data was preferred?
Well, not really, because we have other ODDs, for example, in neuroblastoma, and for that we don't have yet any clinical data. So we obtained that ODD with only preclinical data.
Okay, thanks. Then I have another question. In the previous talks, there were a lot of questions from the audience between PRIME and ODD, and I noticed that in your timeline and the different services that you took advantage from EMA, it is also PRIME. Unfortunately, that didn't go through, but I was wondering if you can speak a bit about that experience with the audience.
Well, we requested a PRIME designation for endometrial cancer after completing our phase 1/2 clinical trial, and we presented to the EMA, and obviously PRIME is really in our case we didn't obtain the designation, although the EMA encourages us to continue the development and to go ahead in case we obtain further data. And we are considering to submit a PRIME designation for our clinical indication in pancreatic cancer after completing the study that is currently ongoing.
Okay, thanks. And I was wondering, when you decided to start to engage with the EMA, did you take advantage of the SME briefing beforehand?
Yes, I think.
Yes. Before doing any application, for example, for the orphan drug designation, of course, we wanted to take advantage of reduced fees, even though for orphan drugs you don't have to pay. But so we did already all the steps. The process to obtain the SME status at that time was really a lot of documentation. It was really a lot of effort. But with the years, the process has been simplified, and the renewals now are very simple.
Yes, thanks. And I think I remember that, Carlos, you told me that it's very important to keep in mind that you need to renew annually your SME status.
Yes.
And I've been told that there are 2 questions from the audience. Can you please post them so we can address them? Okay, so Ability Pharma required a clarification step after receiving scientific advice. How common is this? So this is actually to the EMA colleagues. I don't know if Tony or Jordanis can chime in and address this question.
I can try. I can take this if
yes,
yeah?
Please go ahead.
How common is this? I cannot actually give you like exact numbers. I don't think we've looked at this, but you know, we suspect that we have a slight increase of clarification requests in more recent years exactly because of this, and we've also been a little bit more flexible compared to earlier years in granting clarification, because sometimes there's nothing really to clarify. It's more like a bit of a follow-up question, which theoretically is outside the scope of a clarification. But indeed, exactly because due to the volume of procedures and the fact that we have like less possibility to grant discussion meetings and to iron things out with the applicant, we are being a little bit more flexible as to what we accept in terms of clarification requests. But yes, we do get them.
Thank you very much. Then a question to you, Carlos and Gemma. Did you seek national advice before you apply for EMA advice?
No, we did not seek national advice. We seek in parallel FDA advice.
Okay, thanks. And then you told us that you had a free orphan drug designation. Is this the same drug in different cancer or 3 different drugs? Please, feel free to answer. This is confidential information, also do not.
No. It's the same drug in 3 different cancer types that qualify for orphan designation.
Okay, and with that, thank you very much, Carlos and Gemma, for your participation, and thanks to the audience for their question. And we can move to the last presentation of today's Info Day. And it's a pleasure to me to introduce you to Professor Piotr Członkowski. He's the CEO of Portric, an SME-funded company by the EIC Accelerator. And Professor Członkowski is going to guide you through his journey from academia to becoming a founder of a company. And he will share with you all the different EMA services that have been key in supporting him and his company along the way. And with that, Piotr, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. Can I see my presentation?
I don't see it yet. Now. Okay. Great. Yeah. I was giving the signal that it was coming.
Right. Thank you. So indeed, I'd like to show you how I moved from academia to the company. Can we have a next slide, please? This is my conflict of interest and support. Next slide, please. And this is actually how the journey looks like. We started all the discoveries and the treatment I will be talking about in the academia in my university. But then in 2015, we decided that the only way to go forward is to set up the company, the spin-off from the university. And it was a very lucky decision, a very good decision, because it allowed us first to collect support from European Innovation Council. Second, also collect the advice from European Medicinal Agency on different sides of the treatment. And all that allowed us to gain the credibility, which was enough for us to go for the Warsaw Stock Exchange, and we collected money for further development. Next slide, please. This is the pipeline, current pipeline of our company. We are focused on T regulatory cells in the treatment of autoimmune diseases. This is the ATMP therapy. And we are focused on type 1 diabetes, in which we are the most advanced. We are preparing right now for the pivotal trial, thanks to actually advices from European Medicinal Agency and also from the support from the Horizon. But we are also looking into the presymptomatic patients, and we also are after the phase 1 trial in multiple sclerosis, and right now we are going towards the phase 2 trial, and we are also looking to the next stages, next phases of the development of these drugs with the engineered drugs with the so-called CAR-Tregs or CAR-TCR cells. Next slide, please. But of course, to get into this clinical stage, we have to go through all the stages of the drug development, and especially for the more advanced stages of the drug developments. Next, please. We were lucky enough to have, can we move back, please? Yes, we actually receive several different hands from European Medicinal Agency, from ITF to scientific advice, when we were moving from stage to stage of our development and our clinical trials. Next slide, please. The first hand from the European Medicinal Agency I like to talk about is the scientific advice on the manufacturing, because very often it is neglected, but it is extremely important. And how it is important, I'd like to show you on several examples. Next slide, please. It is extremely important when you want to scale up your production. As I said, we are at the beginning of the pivotal trial, which is the trial which requires plenty of the preparations in order to get into the clinical trial. So for that, we had to construct a new pharma plant we work on the ATMP, which require a sterilized production. So all the details of this plant are important, and in order not to fail when we construct the pharma plant, we ask for several questions which actually helped us to design this plant in a proper way. And currently we are closing that, and the pivotal trial that we want to go through will be with these preparations from this new facility. Next slide, please. But this scientific advice is also important for really scientific details of the manufacturing. Production of the T regulatory cells for the therapy requires several critical steps. You see them on the slide, and the one of them is sorting. Next slide, please. Which is actually crucial to get the real phenotype of the cells. T regulatory cells are complicated in a way that they express some receptors. Some receptors must not be expressed on the cells, and even more difficult is that some of these receptors must be in the particular density on the surface of the cell. So this is really really difficult to get out with it, to get these cells from the peripheral blood. Next slide, please. And the only way to sort these cells was to use the cell sorter, FACS cell sorter. And at the time we are starting our first clinical trials, FACS sorters were not available in a standard of the GMP. The only available standard was immunomagnetic sorting, which was not good for us. So that's why we had to adapt our machine into the clinical conditions. Next, please. So you see here, and next, please. So you see here that we put the whole sorter into the clinical, into the clean room, and additionally under the hood in order to have a pure sorted cells. And then we replace this device. Next slide, please. This device with a new, completely different cell sorter, which is already compatible with the GMP condition. This cell sorter, according to the advice, was adapted to the clean room in a way that indeed it fulfills all the requirements of the GMP manufacturing. And all the details of these procedures, or the majority of the details of these procedures, were actually consulted with this scientific advice. So this way we are sure that the manufacturing we do is acceptable by the European Medicinal Agency. Next slide, please. But we, of course, also consulted our clinical development, our clinical program. And actually, it was our first contact with the European Medicinal Agency, where we first asked for the Innovation Task Force for the advice how we should develop. We came into the Innovation Task Force with the results of our first clinical trial. Next slide, please. It was a phase 1. You see the schema of this trial. So the trial looked like on the slide. First, we were taking a blood from patients with type 1 diabetes. We're sorting T regulatory cells, expanding them to the high numbers, and putting back these cells into the patient. Next slide, please. And after 2 years, we could see a still significant effect of the therapy. You see the black curve, which shows that the patients who were treated with T regulatory cells were still secreting insulin. So this is a kind of the functional test. The child received a kind of the food, and within the 4 hours, we measure the secretion of the insulin or C-peptide, and we see that the reaction in a patient treated is exactly as a reaction of a healthy person. At the same time, the patient who were treated with the standard of care, the red line, they completely lost the secretion of insulin. So we are really excited that this therapy works. And with these results, and of course, we also saw no adverse effects. And with all these results, we came into the Innovation Task Force. And next slide, please. We received the feedback that our follow-up is too short because 2 years is not enough for the lifelong disease. And the number of the patients, this was the phase 1, is too few in order to say anything about the safety and efficacy of the therapy. So with this advice, we came into the further follow-up of our patient. Next slide, please. And we followed our patients through the next years. You see here the results previously showed these 2 years, and also the 5 years later, the result was still available, still seen in our patients. You see that still these patients secrete insulin, which was a very nice results for us. Again, very promising. And next slide, please. And we also set up a second trial in which the patients were either treated with T regulatory cells, or there was an arm which was standard of care without the treatment with T regulatory cells. And additionally, we also put the additional interventional arm. Next, please. And next, please. These were the patients treated with the combined treatment. So patients were receiving T regulatory cells and also the 4 doses of anti-CD20 therapy. And for some reasons, we thought that this may improve very much the efficacy of the therapy. Next slide, please. And indeed, we see that the combined therapy, this is this blue line, was much better than the monotherapy with either T regulatory cells or only anti-CD20 therapy. After 2 years follow-up, around 40% of the patients treated with the combined therapy were still in the clinical remission. So having all those results together, we came to the European Medicinal Agency for another scientific advice. Next slide, please. And of course, we ask, okay, we have all those results. What else should we do in order to ask for manufacturing, for market authorization? And we received the scientific advice for that. Next slide, please. Next, please. European Medicinal Agency said that, okay, in order to receive the marketing authorization, you must perform another randomized blinded clinical trial in which you will be tested this interventional arm that you tested before. So this combined trial with T regulatory cells and anti-CD20 therapy. Next, please. But additionally, we want from you also to see how would it be if T regulatory cells will be given not only twice, but several times. And this must be compared into, next please, into standard of care. So the patients treated only with insulin. Next, please. And next. And 2 additional arms in which patients will be receiving only the monotherapy. And your trial the follow-up should be at least 5 years, because this is again the first of all lifelong disease, and the second, you treat children. So that's why it is important to have really long-term results of the safety. At the first look, it is disappointing because this is pretty complicated therapy, of course. But on the other side, it's much better to receive this kind of the scientific advice before you start your trial, instead of receiving this advice when you have some results, finally, on relatively high number of the patients, and then something is missing. So we are very happy receiving that, and we are preparing for this trial right now. Next slide, please. And also, we are a small company. You can see that plenty of the people are involved. And actually, this is something which we gain through the years. We started from really 2-person or 3-person all this research, but right now we are the developing company, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to provide this good treatment for our patients. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Piotr, for this presentation. I just want to inform the audience that we're having some video issue with Piotr. Before the image was frozen. So if you see him frozen, that's why. But the most important thing that you could hear him. So let's start with some of the questions from the audience. Piotr, did you ask for a PRIME designation? And if yes, based on which clinical data?
We asked for PRIME when we had the results of the phase 1 trial. And the answer, we were actually, we didn't receive that. And that was mainly because the follow-up was too short and the number of the patients was too small. And that's why we were asked, of course, the innovation task force at the same time encouraged us to continue the research, the clinical trials, and to get back with the higher number of the patients with more of the results. But then we decided to go simply to the scientific advice without reapplication of PRIME.
Okay, thanks. And then are you planning to continue getting EMA support?
Oh, definitely. If this is only possible, I would actually encourage everybody for that. This is really something important for the companies who are starting, who are really at the beginning of the journey, because you can receive really the feedback, what is really necessary to go properly through the regulatory requirements.
Yeah, and I would like to emphasize the message that Piotr gave you and was also given during the scientific advice presentation, especially when you're planning clinical studies. Go to scientific advice when you have the plan and not when you actually already done the clinical trials, because you might have wasted some time and resources. So with that, I would like to thank Piotr and all the speakers of this morning. Your presentation has been very, very informative, and I hope that also hearing the experience of the EIC grantees has helped the audience in being convinced that it's really worthwhile taking advantage of the EMA services. I will also want to remind you to go to Sli.do at #EICEMA. The survey is still there, waiting for you to be filled. It will remain open until this evening. And lastly, I want to remind you that the recording of this event will be posted in the YouTube channel, but also a link will be given in the event site, as well as a link for the slides of the presentation. And lastly, that also in the event website, we will post shortly after today an FAQ document that will address all the questions that we received that we could not answer during this morning meeting. And with that, I would like to thank, on behalf of ISMEA, Tony and all his colleagues at the European Medicine Agency for their invaluable contribution and very enthusiastic collaboration that they had with us that enable us to give this Info Day to our beneficiaries. I look forward to working with you for future offerings for our beneficiary. I hope that the event has been fruitful for the audience, that what you learned this morning will actually make a difference in your future research innovation endeavor. And I thank you very much, the audience, for your time and your participation. And with that, Tony, the floor is yours.
Oh, many thanks, Barbara. I can really only echo the sentiments that you've just expressed there. And in particular, it's very humbling to hear the users of the system, you know, the Novi Sad University, Ability Pharma and Poltreg, because, you know, they're the guys that have got the origin of the innovation and then the challenge of how to navigate what is a very complex sort of development pathway. But I think some of those, some of those illustrations are really, really informative and sort of put flesh on the bones of what the colleagues have laid out with regards to the types of services that we offer. It's been said before that it's a journey. I mean, the development journey, and certainly we as regulators want to enable that journey. We're not there to block innovation. We're trying to enable innovation, but we're very much aware that you guys are the creators of that innovation, and you also take on the entrepreneurial challenge, you know, facilitated by structures such as the EIC, etc. And I think, Barbara, as well as expressing thanks to all our contributors and indeed for the attendees of the conference, we ourselves are on a journey of collaboration between, as our directors indicated at the head of this meeting, and let's hope that the attendees have found value in it and that it's a basis for further collaborations into the future. Bye-bye for now, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Indeed. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.